Okay, just testing audio 1, 2.
Richard, we're not meant to be hearing anything yet.
No, you won't for the next testing audio 1, 2. You're not gonna hear anything for the next 10 minutes.
Okay.
But we are now live. So just mute. Thank you.
Molweni, and welcome to day 5 of Climate Action Week. My name is Luvuyo Madasa, and I am your facilitator for today's program. I have the honor and responsibility of taking us from each of the 4 components of today's engagement. Today's session is titled Reimagining Our Future, Entrepreneurship for a Just Transition. And quite quickly, because we do have a jam-packed session today, I'll be just giving you a high-level view of our program and then handing over for our first session. So as mentioned, our first session will be run by Fatou Leigh, Economic Policy Advisor and Research, Strategic Plans, Formulation and Monitoring Evaluation, Promotion of Inclusive Growth. And that session is a high-level opening session, double challenge or double opportunity, just and green recovery and just transition. Then our second session is rethinking the future, pathways and options from a just and green recovery and a just transition to long-term climate-friendly world. Our third session will then be run by myself, and it's the launch of the Indalopreneur Bootcamp, JTEP, and it is a session with Indalo Inclusive. And then the fourth and last session for the day is Just Transition, Just and Green Recovery, Opportunities for Skills, Jobs, and Territories. And this session, like the second session, will be run by Gaylor Montmason-Claire, Senior Economist at TIPS. And with that said, I'd like to hand over to Fatou to start with our opening session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Program Director. I'm very happy to join everybody. With Just Transition, maybe to put it a bit into context, in South Africa, we had already our triple challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And with that, we have now COVID, which has actually helped deepen some of these challenges. I've heard it said somewhere that never waste a crisis. A crisis is also a big opportunity to, it's a big opportunity to make a change for the better. With the extractive industry, we have, if we take, for instance, in Mpumalanga, it happens across the country. But then if you took into consideration in Mpumalanga, there are opportunities out there. Like in the farming industry, 68% of Mpumalanga is used in agriculture production. Tourism is the home of the Kruger National Park, the Sotwale Caves, and the Hyde River Canyon. But then you also have mining, which employs about over 82,000 people. And with ESCOM also employing 50,000 employees. So within that industry, you have it being a big contributor to exports, as well as to the generation of electricity. Now, in South Africa, 92% of the coal consumption goes actually to electricity consumption. So 90% of coal consumption goes towards electricity generation. So you see an opportunity there in that region, as well as in other regions where you have in the extractive industries. But then you also see the challenges that are out there. There are certain realities that is facing South Africa. One, in the extractive industries, especially if we want to talk about mining. Nationally, you have mines closing down. There is a need for a structural change. But then globally, you have challenges that are facing the country in terms of pressures to limit greenhouse gas emissions. That, ladies and gentlemen, is just to put it into context. I have with me 4 well-versed in their different occupational areas, but also in their passion in this area, who are going to help us to decodicate, break it down, and explain to us what this means for South Africa going forward. I would like to present to you Mr. Norbert Goriben, who is the Deputy Director General, International Policy in the German Federation Ministry for the Environment, Nature Reservation, and Nuclear Safety. Second, His Excellency EU Climate Ambassador Mark Van Hoekelen, I'm sorry for that, Mark Van Hoekelen, who is also the former EU ambassador for the WTO. Then I would like to, on this panel, we have Mr. Maktavish Makwarela, who is the Director for Climate Change Mitigation, Policy, Regulation, and Planning at the Department of Environment, Forestry, and Fisheries. Last, but definitely not the least, we have Joanne Yawich, who is the CEO of National Business Initiative. With this panel, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to first introduce Mr. Mr. Nobin Gobi, going to just give us his views and break it down to us in terms of what this means, in terms of this just transition for South Africa, but in terms of opportunities and challenges. Thank you so much, please. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam. Thanks for the kind introduction. Good morning to everybody on the streams. I feel very honored to be the first speaker here. It's because our ambassador was unfortunately not able to come in, and I feel in particular honored to speak ahead of Mark van Hoekelen, because he should be actually the first. But anyway, I don't steal too much from your time, and I hope not too much from your thoughts. In the European Union, we are currently discussing how to prepare our economies for decarbonization. I'm sure Mark will talk about that. There have been very important events last week, and how to organize a greener and better recovery. So that is exactly addressing the question you have raised for this panel: just and green recovery and just transition, double challenge or double opportunity. In my view, it's both a challenge, but there are also opportunities. The transition to a just and climate compatible, decarbonized, sustainable economy can only succeed if the necessary climate, environmental, social, and energy policies are designed in a way that they promote employment and social justice. And that is not only true for South Africa, it's even true for the European Union. Of course, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, it is, as far as climate policies are concerned, for many countries very challenging these times. For instance, in particular, resources are even more scarce, and they have to be prioritized for the acute crisis management. On the other hand, what we are learning these days around the globe, climate crisis is continuing. Biodiversity is declining at unprecedented rates, and we also learn that there are very clear links between the shrink of biodiversity and the pandemic as such. So therefore, it is crucial to put that all together and to develop a recovery process which addresses both sustainable development, but also innovative technology-based economies for a better and skilled and healthier society. And I would like to mention in particular the huge potential for innovation, which I think has to be mentioned in the context of this panel here this morning, which also talks about entrepreneurship. We have seen many countries like South Africa who have included green recovery measures in their national stimulus packages. South Africa has worked with the UN Partnership for Action on Green Economy, PAGE. And I do see a great opportunity to align these green recovery measures with the climate policies, with the updating of NDCs, but also with the long-term development pathways which have to be developed. And let me take the opportunity also to congratulate South Africa in that regard for the recent developments which happened in your country. You had been able to establish the Presidential Climate Change Coordination Commission, which is expected to play a key role in coordinating the national just transition process. There was a decision about the long-term strategy for South Africa to be submitted to UNFCCC. And we do acknowledge, and we hope you will conclude very soon, the ongoing revision process of the National Determined Contribution of South Africa, which we hope to see being presented also to UNFCCC by the end of the year. As you can see, the debates on climate change and just transition are very closely linked. And you already said it, Madam Chair, South Africa has one of the most carbon-intensive economies. Coal plays a key role in the production of energy, but you're also facing severe social challenges, unemployment, inequality, poverty, and the system has just been exacerbated through the Corona and COVID-19 crisis. But also, South Africa is very highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Just to mention droughts and water availability, food production, livelihoods. So these impacts as well have dramatic consequences to natural resources, but also to the society and the economy at large. So therefore, climate change and biodiversity shrink makes the need for substantial transition even more urgent. One of the most challenging things for South Africa is to comply with its commitments under the Paris Agreement. And as you said it already, the energy sector needs progressively to decarbonize. But the transition is not easy to organize, and the social consequences in South Africa are severe. We see that it is difficult to develop South Africa to an economy which is resilient and sustainable and on the long run decarbonized, but there is no alternative. Therefore, Germany stands ready to support South Africa in the just energy transition process. There had been a talk between Chancellor Merkel and President Ramaphosa in person this year in early February, just before the pandemic hit us, and the German government and our embassy is already in close exchange with stakeholders on this topic. My ministry, for instance, supports the just transition process through various projects. There is a climate change support program which supports the Ministry for Environment and helps them to realize the National Employment Vulnerability Assessment, NEVA study, and the development of sector jobs and resilient plans. The project also supports the development of green economy cluster agency Mpumalanga, you mentioned that, with the aim of enabling a structural economic change. And we will strengthen these collaboration within the next months and years. There's just a new big program in the making which will address just transition. Finally, and I mentioned it, entrepreneurship is today's topic. We are very pleased to see business-driven initiatives like ESCOM's expression of interest for submissions of innovative solutions for the repurposing of coal-fired power stands, as well as the engagement of the National Business Initiative in this debate. In my view, it's really an opportunity for the many young, committed entrepreneurs and people in South Africa to take that up and change the country towards a more sustainable future. We, as BMU, see South Africa as one of our core partners in international climate and business and biodiversity policies. We are willing to continue the fruitful political dialogue with our South African partners, and I wish you a very fruitful discussion today and good luck with all the challenging work which is ahead of you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much for that. It's good to hear that already German government and the South African government are already in talks, and that you are working with the government in order to promote alternative energy like wind energy in that area, as well as in entrepreneurship development. So I would like to invite at this point in time, His Excellency, Mark Van Huskelen, to kindly give us his reflections. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Fatou, and colleagues on the panel, as well as the broader audience. Good morning from Brussels. On your question, double challenge and double opportunity, green recovery and just transition, as was said by Norbert, it is of course both. It is a double challenge, but it's also a double opportunity. And as you said yourself, Fatou, we're now going through a crisis which is unprecedented with COVID and the big economic downswing that we're experiencing. But it also presents now us with an opportunity because spirits ripen much more quickly in a crisis. And so things that were unthinkable a year ago are now firmly on the agenda. It is a double challenge in the sense that on the one hand, we need to make sure that we keep global warming from, or we need to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius, as we have all pledged in the Paris Agreement. That's a task for developed countries because they are the source of historical emissions, but it's also a task for all developing countries. Right now, developing countries account for 70% of emissions in the world. So we both have a task on our hands. Africa is, of course, a continent with a little share or a small share of emissions today, about 2 to 3%. But what is crucial is that Africa now takes the decisions that will avoid big future emissions. And the decisions of today with regard to energy will determine what sort of an economy you will have in 10, 20 years from now. We need to see that energy transition is fair. Fair for 2 reasons. First of all, for ethical reasons, in the sense that we should not leave anyone behind, but also for political reasons. If people feel left to their own devices, there will be a backlash. There will be a backlash, protest movements, which will then translate into political opposition. We've seen that in Europe, where people felt they were left behind. You had this, perhaps you've heard of it, this yellow vest movement in a number of countries. People who are saying, well, you're talking about the end of the world, I'm talking about the end of the month. It's clear that a number of people will have challenges to cope with the energy transition, and we need to help them. These problems will be twofold. One is we have to make sure that the regions, as well as the workers in fossil fuel reliant regions, have a diversification strategy away from fossil fuel. Obviously, that applies to coal mining in particular. In addition, as we know from experience, moving to green technologies has the following sort of nature. It requires a fairly big initial investment, but the savings are then generated over the years. So you make an investment which is recouped by savings over the years to come. We have to make sure that people, firms, local governments are equipped to make that investment so that they can then benefit from the lower costs later on. So it's an issue of front-loading the cost, and the national government, as well as international donors and multilateral agencies, have to make sure that that cost can be borne. In the European Union, we have shown that you can decouple, that you can decarbonize without having a big hit on your growth, quite the contrary. This morning, it was published that the European Union in 2019, so before COVID, has made a cut in its greenhouse gas emissions of 24% compared to 1990. In that period from 1990 to 2020, we grew by 60%. So we cut emissions by 24, whilst at the same time growing economically by 60%. So it's clearly doable to decarbonize. But we've got to make sure that it is done in a cost-efficient and fair way. In Europe, we have had quite a bit of experience over the last 20, 30 years with reconversion of regions that were heavily reliant on coal and steel. We have closed a lot of mines because they were economically not justified anymore. And in addition, let's face it, mining is often a hazardous and unhealthy occupation. So if you can move out of mining, that's something that you should do also for reasons that have nothing to do with climate change. We in the European Union are still having a number of areas heavily reliant on coal, and for the next 7 years, we're now going to put in place a just transition set of instruments that should allow, especially countries or regions in Central Europe and notably in Poland, to diversify away from coal. We're going to help them to reskill and their workers, to assist them in their search for jobs, and to provide alternative economic activities, notably in the field of green technology, of the circular economy, and in innovation. The good news is that in the world right now, money is fairly cheap. The real interest rate in many parts of the world is very low. We should make sure to avail ourselves of the capital that is available, to invest it in the technologies in the future, in innovation. There, the multilateral development banks like the World Bank, but also your national development banks will need to play a big role to chart the course forward to diversify economies away from fossil fuels. There is an European Union and South African strategic partnership that exists in 2007. I think we need to mobilize the tools that we have in that partnership to make sure that the European Union assists South Africa in its decarbonization strategy. Through technical assistance, through financial assistance, to accelerate the decommissioning of coal, to retrain workers, to diversify the economy. We need to deliver on that for your sake, for our sake, for that of the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those reflections. Very pertinent, very relevant, and very much needed at this point in time, especially when you talk about the need to move from fossil fuel as well as introduction of innovation. That is very, very, very pertinent. At this point, I would like to, because of the time that we have, I'd like to call on Joanne Yawik to kindly come in and give his reflections. There's been talk about moving away from fossil fuel. Most of the people who are also employed are also from that area. So in terms of enterprises development, what does that mean? Can you kindly share your reflections? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for giving the National Business Initiative an opportunity to talk on this platform. For those of us who don't know us, we're an organization that is made up of companies in South Africa, mainly large, some small, that are committed to socio-economic and environmental transformation. And in that context, the issues of a just transition and the kinds of transition pathways that the country needs to put in place are of a fundamental concern for us, very much from an opportunity-based perspective. So I think that we have seen COVID as amplifying all of the challenges and problems that South Africa has, both at a socioeconomic level as well as environmentally, but also in many ways through the increased emphasis on a green stimulus internationally, opening up a set of opportunities. And I think that's where the entrepreneurship opportunity really does come in. However, I think that one of the challenges that we do have in relation to the kind of scenario that has already been sketched out, both by yourself in your introduction, Chair, as well as by our esteemed speakers is the fact that the energy-intensive economy that we have in South Africa is deeply embedded. It was a creature of initially colonialism and then of apartheid. And in trying to shift and change that economy, particularly in a way that opens up opportunities not only for entrepreneurs, but also for ordinary people to make sure that no one is worse off than they are at the moment, and that pretty much everyone is better off, you've got to have a plan. And so we, together with support from a number of partners, and now in particular would like to thank SPIPA. We also, in partnership with PACT UK and with Women in Business, have brought the business sector together. We're working in partnership with Business Unity South Africa, as well as with the Boston Consulting, who are our technical partners. And what we are doing is trying to work out a sector plan for each industry in South Africa, big industry sectors, sector by sector by sector, to get a plan that is as practical and as concrete as possible towards looking at whether in actual fact we can get by 2050, make our fair contribution to a net zero emissions global economy. And I think that really is the work that we see as necessary, is to say, we can say whatever we want, but in order for South Africa to be able to mobilize the technology, the financial support, the capacity that we need, the technology support that we might need as a country, that plan must be put in place. So we're going to be working very intensively with the whole of business over the next year or so in this initiative to try and plot out a set of transition pathways that we think would work together, provide firstly an input and a support into the work that government is going to be doing to review our nationally determined contribution, but also as something that really could start to open up in a practical way the opportunities for business. And we would really like to see the kinds of partnerships that we have deepened in order that we can turn them into practical action. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that is very important, working with whole of government to develop that sector plan. I would again say that maybe not only whole of business, but then working with the education system so that they also produce the graduates that you want in terms of training, capacity building, reskilling, retooling, so that, you know, they're also able to serve the private sector. That is very important.
And there is a skills element to the work, yeah, including pilots. Green economy pilots, yeah.
Thank you. And that also means working with government. And thank you so much, Joanne Yatwik. Thank you so much for that. Very important. It was deliberate that we asked Mr. McTavish to share his reflections the last, because when Mr. Goben started talking, he said, we cannot do this without good policies in place. We cannot do it without having a strategy and a plan, and the policies should be implementable, that we need to have that in place. So I would like at this point in time to invite Mr. McAvey to kindly share his reflections with respect to that. In terms of relating to the topic, double challenges or double opportunities. What should be the policy environment be like? And is South Africa in that direction? What are the gaps? Kindly share your reflections.
Thank you, Fatou, and good morning all. Thank you again for giving us the opportunity to share our views with you during this session. As the previous colleagues have reported, I think this session came at the right time when our government have just approved very important documents or structures that will really play a major role in us transiting to that low carbon economy and climate resilient society. The colleagues talks about the cabinet approving the presidential coordinating commission to oversee and coordinate just transition in the country. And this is just to demonstrate how seriously we take this agenda of just transition as we implement our climate change responses. So we are on course to incorporate the just transition, or we implement the climate change action in a just manner. There's also the pathways in terms of low emission development strategy that has just been passed by a cabinet, which talked to various measures and policies. Of course, with energy being prioritized since the majority of our emissions are coming from that sector. We also acknowledge that we are living in a world that has climate change, and what we need to do is to build the emergency to respond and build the resilience. And as such, Cabinet also approved our national adaptation strategy. Lastly, the other document that was approved by the same Cabinet sitting was the waste management strategy. And this has also mainstreamed the climate change responses in it. So we have the enabled policy and environment that will allow us to take action. And most of you will remember that as early as 2011, the government published the National Climate Change Response Policy, which guide us in terms of how we shall adapt to climate change and make our fair contribution to the global effort to reduce emissions. And this has become our commitment through the Copenhagen Accord, and lately during the Paris Agreement, because what came out as a trajectory became our nationally determined contribution. Our National Development Plan also, Chapter 5 of the NDP talks about the need for us to transit to low carbon economy and climate resilient society by 2030. And that work is being amplified by the National Planning Commission to look at a much longer term horizon, 2050, in a form of a national vision and pathways in terms of how we get there. And there are a number of pieces of technical work that sectors are doing that will feed into this process. But what we are agreeing at a national level is to say, whatever the measures that we prioritize must be done in a just manner, in that we don't want, as we transit, to compromise the livelihood, the jobs, and the economic growth activities of the country. And as such, we need to have a smoothened, planned transition. We have started doing work in anticipation of job losses as a result of some sectors starting to prepare themselves for the transition. And we looked at 5 value chains, talking about coal, metals. The earlier speakers talks about mining and energy. We also looking at transport, tourism, and agriculture. And this also relates to the issue of biodiversity losses, since our tourism, for example, is anchored on nature, specifically biodiversity. So what is coming out from that piece of work is that we need to focus our strategy to build resilience. And for us to do that, we need to clarify responsibilities in terms of coordination and overseeing or oversight of just transition. And we are on course as we are now in a process to establish that presidential commission. But we also need to focus on the territories that are impacted in trying to help them to coordinate themselves by, for example, establishing small offices in those territories so that the office can coordinate the stakeholders impacted so that we can address the challenges that the livelihoods of those territories are faced with. So, for example, if we're talking about Mpumalanga, the localities that are impacted by the energy transition will be supported to, establish those offices to manage the transition at that local level. Colleagues also talked about the innovation, and we are seeing the need for us to strengthen the national system of innovation, particularly focusing on social innovation. And that's how we see the upliftment and the building of entrepreneurship. We can do that if we promote social innovation so that the local skills can be enhanced. There's also an issue around understanding the profiles of those that are impacted. If you're talking about livelihoods, I think in theory, you can easily replace jobs that are lost by people who depend on coal mining or coal-powered fire stations. In theory, you can do that, but without understanding the levels of skills, the age of those that are impacted, you might face challenges in that you will need to come up with alternatives that are fit for purpose for those that are impacted. For example, those that are impacted by the transition in Mpumalanga, the majority of those are people with low skills and low education levels, to a level where it might be a challenge to transform them to take up job opportunities to other sectors. And the other issue is that for the level of education and skills compared to the counterparts in other sectors of the economy in the country, the salaries are a bit high for the set of skills that these people are offering. And when you come up with strategies, you also need to look at that. The one last issue is around diversification of their economies. Of course, these economies have been built around the energy intense economy. And as we transition, we need to come with alternatives in terms of how we can build these economies, because these are small towns that have always dependent on the economy that was built around coal mining, for example. So there are opportunities that we are seeing. For example, as we close these mines, there can be an opportunity for land rehabilitation programs. There are issues around repurposing of land to also look at agriculture. And there will be waste. We can beneficiate that waste. And for example, from our department, we have the programs like Waste Pakisa and the Waste Bureau that can play a major role in beneficiating that waste. And there are also opportunities that talks to the stakeholder mobilizations around the social labor plans and the integration of that into the integrated integrated development plans that local municipalities will develop. But that needs some level of mobilization from the stakeholders, and the role of that small office can come in very handy here. Of course, this will need resources in terms of technical skills and finances, and there is a need for these localities to be supported to start to develop bankable projects and programs that will demonstrate the implementation of that just transition. So to conclude, I will say yes, we are on course to put in measures to address climate change, and we can arrest this climate change crisis. But at the same time, we need, in parallel to that, be coming up with plans to arrest these negative impacts that will come with the responses that we'll put in place. And the support to do that is pretty much welcome. I shall stop here, in the interest of time, because I can go on forever on this topic. Thanks for the opportunity to share this with you.
Thank you so much. And again, we can also go on for a long time just listening to you speak about this. Your passion and your knowledge on the issue is very apparent as you go and explain to us. One, about the policies that are in there that you're working on, and they need to diversify and look at alternative ways of employment creation or livelihood generation, whether it is in value chains or whether it is in other sectors like agriculture that they need to look at. You gave us a caution, which is very relevant, that in this mining industry, most of the people are actually low or semi-skilled, and they are not easily, they cannot be easily absorbed into, the market. So you need to manage it. You need to have a smooth transition for that. I think that is very relevant and hard. And we had your appeal to continue in terms of partnership, working together to make sure that this is a reality. And this is indeed very pertinent, because if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, this issue touches on 13, on 11, on 7, as well as on poverty and inequality. So if we are to attain the Sustainable Development Goals, we definitely need to make sure that it is done in a way that is, one, inclusive, where you work with the different partners, but also in a way that people are not left behind in that process. For UNDP in South Africa, we're working with the government in terms of wind energy management, as well as there's another project we're doing, which is on leapfrogging South Africa's markets to high efficiency LED lighting. So basically trying to also minimize the emission that can happen from use of alternative energy, means of energy that are not very efficient. And maybe before we close, Mark, if I can just kindly come back to you, given what we have had in terms of the needed policy that is in place, and then you touched on one key thing, which was very interesting to me. You said you decarbonized. You managed to reduce carbon emission by 24%, yet growth increased by 60%. Can you tell us just 2 key things that South Africa need to do in order to get to that direction? Just 2 things.
Mark, can you please unmute?
Now I should be audible. What I was trying to say is that there are two lines to pursue. One is shift your energy supply from fossil fuel based to wind, solar, and other types of energy that do not lead to greenhouse gas emissions. And secondly, invest heavily in energy efficiency for heating, for cooling, for industrial processes. Those are the 2 main tracks that we have followed. and they themselves become a source of economic activity and growth. If you look, for instance, in Europe right now, the people that are employed in the green technologies, that number is far, far bigger than, for instance, in mining. These are sources of dynamism. This is for us not only an environmental policy, it is actually our new growth strategy.
Thank you so much. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, that's a very excellent way to close off this session. If we can take any key takeaways from this session is that one, the policies do matter. We need innovation. We need to find alternative ways of livelihood generation, diversify the economy. And also, since the government is already on that path in terms of renewable energy, there is need to accelerate on those alternative sources of renewable energy. With that, Mr. Program Director, we want to end this session and to thank everybody for your keen attention during this. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatou, and fellow panelists, for your opening remarks. A reminder to everyone that is tuned in today that the Q&A box is available for you to submit your questions, and we will, as the moderators, work them through the Q&A sections. And also that our main handles to follow are @ClimateWeekSA, along with @IndaloInclusive. And the hashtag today is @TECDW2020. And we do then welcome for each of you and your organizations to include the hashtags that best represent your thrust and how you will be approaching the contributions that you're making to our just transition. I think the main points, as to echo Fatou's contributions and wrap up, is that the main points that were being made are about collaboration and coordination and commitment to achieving this just transition from green to a green recovery. And even beyond the current pandemic that we are experiencing, that has unfortunately highlighted the gaps that we have, but also has given us an opportunity to engage on rethinking the future. And that's just our next session. And I'd like to invite Gaylor Montmason-Claire to facilitate a discussion on pathways and options from a just and green recovery and a just transition to long-term climate-friendly world. Over to you, Gaylor.
Thank you so much, Luvuyo. And good morning again to everyone who has tuned in to this feed. As introduced, the next discussion, next session, will focus really on pathways and channels to achieve a just transition going forward. From the experience of other countries, we've seen very clearly that if it is not planned proactively from government, from business, from all stakeholders, then a just transition is highly unlikely. So it was very stressed that collaboration and coordination should be at the core of this, and so should planning and implementation. They really go hand in hand, and that's the only way that we would be able to achieve a just transition. It will not happen by default, and it needs proactive interventions. So this is some of the questions that we're going to explore in this upcoming session. As a way of introducing the session, the work has been easily cut out for myself. We have a very brief video that we're going to show you on what has been happening in the European Union, some of the dynamics and mechanisms that have been put in place. After the video, we'll move into our discussion session.
The European coal regions are really having their voice heard more, I think, nationally and at the European level. Only around the last 12 months, we have seen really, I think, a much bigger political commitment to this transition. In New York this year, we have heard that Hungary wants to phase out coal. Greece wants to phase out coal. The German Coal Commission has also made the recommendation to phase out by 2038. So we have seen really a lot of countries that are today relying on not only coal use but also coal production, really making very bold political statements. The new European Commission and the new objective is just transition, and also a very specific, how to say, definition of just transition, because so far just transition has been about social dialogue, which is very important. But here we are talking about helping the people and regions which are most impacted by the transition, and looking around the world how this just transition is being done. This is a very ambitious way of approaching just transition. It's really about addressing the social and economic consequences. Another good thing is that we are also going to have more resources to do this just transition. So we know that there is going to be the Just Transition Fund proposal, but also a whole just transition mechanism. So we want to be using all the different EU funds that we have more effectively to help those regions and people which are most impacted.
So as we've seen, the message is clear. We need political will, and we also need to now move away from only social dialogue to actual implementation. Of course, not forgetting social dialogue in the process. And there's been a lot of that in South Africa, and I'm very pleased to welcome our first speaker for this session, Steve Nichols, who is the head of environment at the National Business Initiative, and will be speaking to us on what business is embarking on from a just transition perspective. Steve, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Carlo. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so as our CEO mentioned in the opening session, the NBI is working with a range of partners to develop a net zero plan for business. And that net zero part is important. When we talk about just transition, we have to be thinking about this context of climate change, and that to get to net zero emissions, we have to look at sectors beyond coal and look at a wide range. I mean, you have to look at the entire economy in reality. And in fact, there are an enormous amount of linkages between all of these parts of the economy. So for example, something that Gaylor can also share more about, in the transition of mining, you have to attach to what the minerals are used for. So in the case of platinum, a third of platinum demand comes from the autocatalytic converter, which is used in the internal combustion engine. And so as we try to solve the transport emissions problem, we also then create a problem in the mining sector, because we reduce this demand for people working in very specific areas that create very specific livelihoods. So understanding this whole economy interaction is a really important part of this pathways conversation, but also is understanding the physical impacts of climate change. So South Africa is unfortunately one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to the physical impacts of climate change. And so we tend to forget that and try to compare the costs of transition to no alternative. And so we have to bear in mind that if we don't follow these economic transitions and these important pathways, then we attract this physical risk that in fact is greater. So we should embrace these transitions, I guess, is a key message from us, and start to work out what it is that we have to do. And when we get into the detail of economic transition sector by sector, we see that we need quite a wide range of support. And so that transition support will have to be international finance, international trade agreements, vertical support across various value chains. So for example, what's the connection between the future of platinum in hydrogen-based fuel cells and the platinum sector, and the use of hydrogen in the manufacture of steel, and so on. And so understanding that some of the risk isn't always borne by the heavy emitting part of that value chain node, we need to be able to map that out and see where we can get vertical cross-subsidization. At the same time, although carbon neutral by 2050 is the climate focus that's demanded of us by science, we have to think, as our earlier facilitator said, in the context of the SDGs. So this is also an opportunity for us to think about pathways and the specific social and economic justice impacts that are required. We have to be able to do this that addresses South Africa's South Africa's triple bottom line, poverty, inequality, and unemployment, but we also have to be able to address race and gender inequality, which are pervasive in our country. And so how do we build all of these into the transition? So this is probably the most complicated problem that we have to solve in our history, and it requires intense collaboration. There's no way that a single party can resolve this. Business have to work with government, government have to work with civil society, academia have to work with labor, and we're going to find interesting ways to solve this problem. Ban Ki-moon, when he was head of the UN, made this comment that we will need interesting and surprising alliances. And I guess that's also an important and interesting part of this transitions conversation, is let's find those surprising alliances. Are competitors going to work together? Labor and business are allies in this. How do we kind of resolve these complex relational issues? So I'll leave that as an introduction, Gailo, and then we can talk about some of these technical transitions in the questions. Thank you.
Great, Steve. Thanks so much. I think you really pointed out to some of the complexities, as you said, and that's been clear in the work that we've been doing to date, actually, as steps, through this value chain, looking at the very much complex nature of that transition from our mining or our agriculture all the way to manufacturing, the processing, consumption, but also the waste management of all the elements. And an intervention at one end of the value chain may have a ripple effect, positive or negative, at another end of the value chain. And I think that's really important to consider those complexities. And we'll definitely get back into that in the discussion. Without further ado, however, let's jump right into our next speaker, which is Mandy Rambaros from Eskom. So very much at the crux of the issue of just transition. As we've heard, just transition is very much of an economy and society-wide transition and transformation. But in South Africa, coal does remain at the core of the discussion, sometimes overshadowing other discussions, but nonetheless, very pleased to welcome Mandy, who's the head of the newly established Just Energy Transition Office at Eskom. Mandy, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gailo. And like you say, we're at the coalface of this whole discussion, no pun intended. But I think, the discussions throughout this morning and what everybody's been saying so far plays a very important role in Eskom's plan for medium to long-term sustainability. And I think it's no secret to at least the South Africans on the call, the crises that we currently face as Eskom. And so how do we solve all of these things at once, or can we solve all of these things at once, is something that we're looking to in terms of what are the various strategies, what are the various things we can do to deal with the electricity crisis, but also to deal with post-COVID economic recovery. And so one of the speakers earlier said, how do you define a just transition? And one of the things we've been looking at Eskom is that this refers to, for us, to a transition towards a low carbon, so that's pretty clear, climate resilient economy. So Steve spoke about resiliency, earlier speakers spoke about adaptation. We are such a vulnerable country, also a vulnerable company. If we have no water, we can't generate electricity, right? But also a resilient society. So in a manner that does not impede socioeconomic development and occurs, very importantly, in a phased manner over time. So I think what's very important for us is, and the reason we established this Just Energy Transition Office in Eskom, is to have a very focused, determined view on how we develop Eskom's Just Energy Transition going forward. So the socio-economic response is extremely important. Transitioning to a low carbon future is extremely important. And what we're looking at is how do we solve these things together? There's a number of things we're currently doing. So we are currently shutting down coal-fired power plant, as you know. And where we're shutting down coal-fired power plant, you cannot just lock the door and throw away the keys, so to speak. You have to look at how do we ensure that those economies or those societies are protected. And so one of the things we are busy developing is socioeconomic impact studies where plants are shutting down imminently. So there are 3 plants where we only have a couple of units running. And because we're shutting down those plants, those towns are very dependent on the power station, on the coal mine for their jobs. So it would be irresponsible to not have a socioeconomic impact study. and look at how do we promote the societies going forward. So one of the things we're very committed to is repurposing. Norbert mentioned earlier the EOI process, our expression of interest process that went out. And what we did go out to ask the market is, what are the ideas out there and how we can repurpose our power plants? We have our own ideas, obviously, and very obviously we think about the energy options, repurposing with renewables, for example, building PV storage, that kind of thing on our sites. We have a lot of land, but there might be other ideas like they've done in the UK where they've repurposed with motor manufacturing, or like they've done in Australia where they've repurposed with tomato farms, So those kind of ideas we've gone out to the market to ask for ideas on. The other kinds of things we're focusing on through this Just Energy Transition Office is optimizing green and climate financing opportunities. What are the opportunities out there? Are there opportunities we can tap into as a state-owned company? Are there opportunities we can tap in with partners? So one of the things we're also looking at is accelerating a renewables build. Whether it's small-scale microgrids or large-scale renewables, what is our role? How do we enable that? And are there partnerships that we can get into to enable that as well? And then the evaluation of new concepts. We're talking about entrepreneurship and reimagining here. So the hydrogen economy that Steve mentioned, can we leapfrog gas as a transition fuel? I know that's quite a difficult thing to say in our current environment, but is it something we're looking at seriously? Is it something that we can do? We're looking into research into various storage options, not just battery storage, but how do we also look at exploring partnerships for optimizing on these kinds of things? And then, many people have said it already, Gayla, and I think it's an extremely important thing. Nobody can do this on their own, not even a state-owned company, not government, not business. How do we work on collaboratively together? And so one of the things that I'm trying to do through this office and Eskom is trying to do through our Just Transition program is to increase our transparency on JET initiatives, local, national, international standards. How can we work together to bring these various things together? So I think, like you said, rightly said, it's a complex problem. It's a wicked problem, as people would say. How do we resolve all of these things together? But it's something we need to look at collectively with financial enablers, with policy enablers, and with working together collaboratively. So I'll also stop there and happy to go into more details as we go on, Gelo. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Mandy. I think you really highlighted the complexity within actually even a business, such as Eskom, of what you have to deal with in terms of course, we know the current situation of the company, of the utility, but there's now a bigger context within which you have to operate as well. And as you pointed out, the impact on communities, on employment. We know that in some cases, the power stations, it's not just the jobs, it's actually waste management, it's water supply, it's sanitation. So it's a much bigger problem, and we need to really have this overarching view. So looking forward to getting into some of the detail on that. Our next speaker is going to take us a little bit away from South Africa, I guess, and to a bit more of a global perspective, as it is pertinent and relevant for South Africa. I'm very happy to introduce Sienda Siko from the International Labour Organization. He is also the country coordinator for the United Nations Program for Action on Green Economy in South Africa. So really looking forward to hearing Sienda on this global perspective and how it relates to South Africa. Sienda, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gayla, and good morning to my fellow panelists and everyone joining us today. As you have mentioned, I'm the South African coordinator of the UN Partnership for Action on Green Economy. And I'm happy to boast that out of the 7-page donors that generously support the work that we do, they include the government of Germany and the EU. So just transition as an ideological construct has gained an increasing currency in political capital as most countries are grappling with climate change and developing pathways to low carbon and inclusive green economy. As we have had, various countries globally are in different stages of their energy transitions. These include Canada, Germany, and as you have heard earlier, Spain and so forth. So I've been asked to provide a global perspective on how to rethink the future And I want to start by highlighting key recent milestones achieved in the global just transition discourse. So in 2015, the tripartite constituents made up of 24 experts nominated by representatives of government, trade unions, and employee organizations of the ILO developed guidelines for just transition towards sustainable economies and societies for all. And we also know that the preamble of the Paris Agreement refers to just transition of the workforce and creation of decent work and quality jobs. In 2018, COP24 announced Solidarity and Just Transition Declaration. And last year at COP25, we also announced the Climate Action for Jobs initiatives, which the ILO has been mandated to lead by the UN Secretary General. So I think there is a broad agreement that the current trajectory, or business as usual, if I may call it, if we don't do anything about it, we're looking at 3 to 4 degrees temperature rise by end of the century. If we do not act now, the risk could be uncontrollable. It can affect workers and their communities, but also it can affect the livelihoods of all people worldwide. Therefore, we need to ensure that there's a just transition to limit this global warming to at least 1.5 degrees. There is a need for fundamental restructuring and reorientation of economic planning. We need to embrace a pathway that will ensure that we achieve an inclusive green economy. But we should also be honest that there will be winners and losers. In case of South Africa, for example, trade unions are raising sharp concerns about displacement and vulnerability of workers who are currently working in the carbon-intensive sectors of the economy. So as we ponder on how to rethink the future, we should be able to address 3 things. Number one, what are the new jobs and where are they coming from? So the ILO Green Jobs Assessment Modeling Tool indicate that there will be net employment created, and we talk about decent and green jobs in the renewable sectors and other sectors. Some jobs will be substituted, for example, in the transport sector. Some jobs will be eliminated in carbon-intensive industries. The second question is, how do we get there from here? And which sectors? And I think I've heard this morning talking about green economy, circular economy. And as Page, we've always advocated for a transition to inclusive green economy that is characterized by green growth and by green entrepreneurship. So what does just transition mean to South Africa? And I think MEC provided a proper framework by introducing that there is 2050 vision pathways for a just transition in South Africa, which is articulated in that document. And we need to ensure that the just transition is able to protect the vulnerable and ensure that no one is left behind. So as we ponder in my closing remarks on this question, we should be able to provide honest answers to these questions so that we can be able to ensure that the transition is able to ensure that there is social justice and equity and that no one is left behind. Oh, thank you. Over to you, Kayla.
Thanks a lot, Sianda. I think very, very useful to also put a bigger context into perspective, really. It's not just a South African issue. Just transition is becoming really a global trend, really, and we really are at the coalface, really, of that. But it's happening in other countries, in Europe, but also throughout the world, really, and we can really learn from that as we go to some extent. Before jumping into a bit of a Q&A, I'm very pleased to announce our last speaker for our session. It's Matthew Klabane, who is the coordinator for the South African Green Revolutionary Council, and he's also a member of the Mining Affected Communities United in Action. So really active on the grassroots level and the groundwork level. So very, very pleased to give you the floor, Matthew, and to looking forward to your perspective.
Thank you, and good morning to all the colleagues participating in today's session. I grew up in Witbank, And correctly, Witbank is today called Emalahleni, which is the heart of coal mining, where mining started in 1896. And there's so much dependency on mining and the power stations for almost everything. So for us as communities, just transition is very much key in as far as addressing the current environmental, economic, and social challenges we are facing as communities. Just transition is about changing our lifestyles. It's about changing our attitude to nature. Just transition cannot be seen as a top-down solution. It must come from below. It's a bottom-up solution, which means communities and workers must play a key role in determining their future, which is supposed to be respecting and restoring dignity of our workers, of our communities, and respecting the rights of communities and those of workers and those of nature. It cannot be a mechanical type of a solution. It cannot be militarized, because the current challenges that we have are that whenever people are unemployed, they raise concerns. Whenever people are facing environmental challenges, when they stand up for their rights, there's a response which is militaristic. There's a growing violence in our communities because of unemployment. There's a growing violence in our communities because people are trying to escape the poverty that they are facing. So just transition must actually begin to address that. When I say it has to do with us changing our lifestyle and our attitude, and that it must come from below, I mean it cannot be driven in a bureaucratic way. The local communities, the local entrepreneurs must be given the opportunity and be supported to play a pivotal role in as far as just transition is concerned. Because just transition is more about the restoration of our dignity. It is more about us as communities, as society, rolling back our dependency on fossil fuels. And of course, we have done so much damage. Just transition must seek to address the contaminated water sources. Just transition must seek to address the destroyed quality of the soil and ensure that the ecosystem is restored to a state where it is able to sustain life of the current generation and that of the future generations. And key is how do we integrate the indigenous knowledge in terms of addressing the ecological challenges that we have. Yes, renewable energy is quite key. Yes, localization is quite key. And we cannot do without localization, because the more we seek to depend on exportation, on transportation. For instance, at the current moment, we generate electricity, we transport electricity far. What role should local communities play in ensuring that electricity is provided and it is not contributing to the emission of carbons, and that we are not losing energy in the process? So on that note, I just want to say, just transition is more about our dignity, about our future. And yes, it must be participatory and it must be transparent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for this. I would call it a reality check, from the ground, really. What's really happening, at the community level with workers and communities as a whole, as you pointed out. So we do have a few minutes for a bit of discussion, which is great. As I was hoping we would. So I just want to throw it back to all of you, basically, and maybe just I guess just starting with Steve quickly. We said it's all stakeholders involved. Obviously, business is at the core of this. But in South Africa, we also know that we're one of the most carbon-intensive economies in the world. We're very inefficient in the way we use energy. The just transition, it's really going to threaten the business model of many of the businesses that we have in the country. Of course, some of them, they will thrive. They will really benefit from it. But there are quite a number of them that are really at risk. So we'll be interested to know how are businesses sort of looking at this question. Of course, we're not talking about an overnight transition, but you're talking about developing a completely new business model for some businesses. And I guess also trying to understand what are sort of the main drivers or incentives for business to be part of that transition, really. Steve, if you can reflect on this, that'd be great.
Thanks. I'll need the rest of the day to answer that question, but I'll have a quick go at it. So, look, I think that the important thing to understand is that when business models are threatened, that entire value chain of that business is threatened, right? And so it's not only just the capital owners, but it's also the workers and the people who rely on income from those businesses. So the families of the employed as well. And so any threat to a business is something that we have to manage quite carefully and recognizing that some of this risk is exogenous. There's very little that we can do about it. So in some sectors, there's an economic momentum that is at play, that is what's going to happen. And probably the best example of that is coal. If we're going to manage this transition, it's very unlikely that there will be a huge role for coal in the economy going forward, depending on potentially major science changes. The other factor to think about is the point that Matthew was making, is we cannot continue the type of exclusive economy that we have, and we have to flip to an inclusive economy. And so as companies respond to these climate threats, they also having to think about the social context of South Africa, opening up their value chains to entrepreneurs, making their business model more accessible to others. We have to think very carefully about ownership. So as we transition, that the wealth accrues to the broader South Africa rather than to specific groups or even individuals within South Africa. So those are all challenges. The incentives, however, are clear. If we don't do this, your business is finished. And that's really the ultimate incentive. And so businesses have to think very differently about how strategic these risks are to their business. Mandy mentioned earlier how important water is to Eskom. We probably don't all think about that very often, but the kind of climate risks that are threatening Cape Town, as they did around day zero, are also threatening our businesses. And we have to be able to understand what those are in a much more robust way than we have in the past. So this notion that the business of business is business is completely dead now. And we are embedded in society, we are part of society. And so our incentives are to remain in business, to keep our social license to operate. We have to solve these simultaneously challenging climate risks, but social context risks as well.
Great, thanks, Tim. I mean, didn't expect you to provide all the answers. Definitely not. We've been at it for a long time, and I think we need to work a lot harder on this going forward. In any case, I just want to rebound actually on something that you said, but also Matthew raised, and sort of directed to Mandy in saying, we need to really include the communities and have a much more of a bottom-up approach. Going forward. So just can you elaborate on how Eskom is working with the affected communities in, around Ndrina, for example, in Siftrene, in Melasheni? How is Eskom sort of dealing with that transition to make sure that the communities are not worse off after it?
Thanks, Lolo. I like to use that quote that I think the World Business Council coined, which is, business cannot succeed in a society that fails. So there's no way, I mean, linking on to what Steve just said, there's no way you can succeed as a business if the society around you is failing. So what we're doing in the socio-economic impact studies for Grootvlei, Ndrina, and Komati is we're doing quite a in-depth study on what will the impact of coal-fired power stations shutdown be, and what is the links, to the society, mining dependencies, and all of those kinds of things. But I completely agree with what Matthew was saying. It cannot be top down, it has to be bottom up. So part of the study is then to engage directly with our communities. So our power station general managers, the stakeholder managers, and all of those people that work at the power stations have quite a good relationship with the local communities, with the mayor, with the local government. And so those engagements have started already. We did plan as part of the study to have face-to-face engagements with all of the communities, but so the study started at around January, and as you can imagine, then we went into lockdown. So we were not able to do the face-to-face engagements. We did some online engagements, but obviously that is not suitable for every type of engagement. But now, starting with the lockdown being moved to level 1, we're going to start the face-to-face engagements. And I think what's very important to understand is that what we're trying to do is have a social compact to ensure that we're protecting the social compact with communities and not saying, here in Komati Port, we think you need a solar plant, or here at Ndrina in Pullens Hope, we think you need a certain kind of technology to repurpose our plant. What we want to do in engaging with the communities is to say, what is the best mitigation strategy for that community? We're shutting down a coal plant. Will building a PV plant plus storage be good enough for that community? Are there other things we need to look at? So I think while we are looking at options for repurposing, what's very important is the actual engagement of the community to say, from the community's perspective, what do you think the best option would be? So I think it's quite an iterative thing. And like I say, I completely agree. It has to be bottom up. In some of the technology solutions, we are looking at top down in terms of repurposing, but it's an iterative process. And I cannot emphasize more the fact that you need to actually sit down and engage with communities. So at that community level engagements as well, we're making sure that it's language appropriate, that the people that understand, that live in the community, are actually able to advise on what the strategy should be going forward. Thanks, Gelo.
Great, thank you, Mandy. I think that's really comprehensive. Actually, Matthew, just to rebound on this, you really carried the message about having workers and communities to be at the front and have this bottom-up approach. Can you maybe just elaborate very briefly on one or two of the ways to do that? Because it's really easy. We know it's really easy to go for a top-down approach. That tends to be the way policy tends to be made. It's very top-down. Bottom-up is obviously a lot more difficult to implement. So interested in your views on how we could make that happen in South Africa.
Thank you. I think one of the key ways in which this could be done is a constant engagement or constant dialogues with the affected communities in the various parts of the country, especially the youth, which is actually facing unemployment, the high unemployment rates at the moment. We need to engage with them in terms of generating the solutions that will be sustainable. We need to refocus our education system as well. Instead of continuing to put funding or resources in training youth and equipping them with the skills of the current industry, which is coal-based. We need to reskill the youth and make sure that the youth is trained in such a way that it will be able to help us address some of the challenges that we are facing. For instance, the technical know-how to deal with acid mine drainage, the technical know-how to do rehabilitation and soil restoration is very much important. That is the kind of dialogues that must be ongoing within communities. And it must not be done at once. It must not be done with the workers for once. It must be done on an ongoing process so that they can be part of the process. And they must feel to be contributing. They must feel to be respected when they are making their contributions. I earlier on picked up this understanding that most of the communities that are mining affected, and especially the workers, are underskilled. The reality of the situation is that people down there have got solutions, but unfortunately those solutions, because of the paradigm that we have, are not respected. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I think the message is heard loud and clear, really. And we need to empower stakeholders to really have a meaningful and inclusive outcomes, but also process. I think that's really important. Before closing, one last question to Sianda. Sianda, you mentioned, obviously the impact in the coal value chain on workers, but also on communities. What do you think are some of the key interventions that need to be taken so that we address, the drawbacks on the people who are going to really lose their jobs, but also lose their livelihood? It's not just about the workers, of course. There's low-income communities and community as a whole that are going to be impacted. What are some of the key sort of interventions that can be implemented to try and address that problem?
Thank you, Gayla. The South African just energy transition process should ensure that issues of distributional, procedural, and restorative justice are taken into consideration. And as the ILO, we have, as I've said, we developed guidelines which advocate for, first thing, to ensure that there is policy coherence and effective institutional arrangement in macroeconomic planning, but not just at a macro level, as well as at a sectoral level. Secondly, the ILO guidelines also place social dialogue between government, business, trade unions, and civil society organizations as the cornerstone to addressing these justice issues that I'm talking about. And furthermore, the guideline highlights the importance of employment policies, emphasizing the need for enterprise development initiatives, skills development that are accompanied by active labor market policies. And the ILO, as you know, has a number of enterprise development tools that it has developed aimed at the creation of green jobs and skills for just transition. But the guidelines equally emphasize the need to ensure that occupational health and safety, as well as social protection, especially as we talk about the displacement of other workers. So we need to come up with social protection measures as we develop just transition plans. And I think I should stop from there, but I want to emphasize the importance of driving entrepreneurship and enterprise development that is focusing on green growth and green entrepreneurship.
Thanks so much, Sianda. I think that was really useful, and the guidelines are of course available, and everybody can reference to them. So it only remains for me to thank all of you, Steve, Mandy, Matthew, Sianda, for your contribution. I think we only started just to tease the problems and the solutions. A lot more work is required, but really appreciate your different perspectives. And I think we all have the will to try and address the problem and to have a just transition. So now it's just about designing it and implementing it. Of course, that's the hard part. But thank you so much again. It was really a great session, and really please stay tuned for the rest of the program. Luvuyo, back to you.
Ngozi, thank you. Thank you, Gelo. And I must say it's quite encouraging and exciting when the dialogue unfolds itself in a way where the next themes start answering some of the questions that are not only being posed in the chat box, but some of the recommendations that are being made by the panelists thus far. So thank you very much. The next section speaks to the importance of taking advantage of this opportunity, the one that we have right now, and starting to showcase how we can practically demonstrate implementation. And with that said, there's a short video that I'd like to play before I hand over to Mr. Rest Kanju, who will then launch and speak to the Indalopreneur Bootcamp.
Our world is in trouble. Almost every ecosystem on Earth has been altered by human activity. The result is climate change. Extractive industries, such as mines, coal-powered electricity plants, have for over a long period of time been the source of employment and livelihoods for many rural and urban populations. However, they are now sunset industries. Our people are gradually losing their jobs. It is not too late. If we act now with urgency and adequate financial investment, we can save livelihoods, the environment, and the economy. Green technologies, as well as ecologically sound and socially inclusive entrepreneurship, is a proven viable economic contribution to society.
To address the urgent challenges facing humankind, such as sustainable development and climate change, South Africa, as a member state of the International Labour Organization, has embraced the guidelines for just transition towards environmentally sustainable economies and societies. Partnership for Action on Green Economy, which is a project that I'm coordinating, has been working with the National Planning Commission in development of the 2050 Vision Pathways for a Just Transition in South Africa.
Various local companies, empowered and supported by government, legislation and incentives, are investing resources to support and empower communities, entrepreneurs, to take opportunities in sustainable and green spaces.
A big focus of our socio-economic development programs, including enterprise development, is how do we diversify the economy? And what we have seen, if you look at the Limpopo province, what's almost unique about it, it's the landscape. It's the opportunities for agriculture, for tourism, for arts, for culture, the sun that we have available here, the land, the vastness of the land. And our view as Venetia Mine is that we are looking at what is it that makes the area around the mine unique. How do you turn that into an economy for the people staying there? So the overall aim of our enterprise development program is really to build capacity within small businesses, to number one, get them to be sustainable, and hopefully in the long run, start to employ more people and turn the economy of the area.
There are individuals who are taking initiative to develop interventions that are linked to established green markets. Take, for example, Sam Seremula, an inspirational entrepreneur from Limpopo who started with 10 samples and is currently a supplier of 300,000 moringa and wild bilbin plants to Botanica as an outgrower. Sam now employs 4 people and earns a meaningful income. Another good innovation is the government of Flanders, an Indalo Inclusive supported South African Climate Adaptation Award winner, BN Aqua, who have developed a prototype technology that purifies acid mine drainage into potable drinking and irrigation water.
Personally, I think the 17 global sustainable goals need to be integrated as much as possible, because if you look at the world today, we are living in a global village, and therefore you cannot compromise one developmental goal over the other. But what is primarily more critical to me is the empowerment of women, is the innovation of industry, because our trading partners all over the world uses technology, they uses innovation, they uses advancement to advance their economies, with the resultant that it betters their socio-economic development for the societies.
Indalo Inclusive South Africa, NPC, will serve as the implementer of choice for the Just Transition Enterprise Support Program, with a focus on the Mpumalanga and Limpopo provinces.
The Just Transition Enterprise Support Program aims to support established entrepreneurs that are within the renewable energy space, food and agriculture, water, transportation, and industrial technologies within the mining communities and value chains. The central objective of the Just Transition Enterprise Support Program is to support innovation and entrepreneurship in finding solutions to support South African efforts to move and enable a just transition.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to invite Mr. Rest Kanju of Indalo Inclusive for his opening remarks in this section.
Thank you very much, Luvuyo. Thank you so much. Reimagining our future entrepreneurship for a just transition is our theme for today. And to borrow from a widely and commonly used phrase that we've got accustomed to in recent times, building back better. The time to build back better is now. And entrepreneurship is at the heart and the core of the work that we do as Indalo Inclusive. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, my name is Rest Kanju, and I'm the Director and Head of Operations of Indalo Inclusive South Africa. We are grateful to the support of the European Union and the Federal Ministry of Environment, Nature Conservation, Building and Nuclear Safety for their generous support and enabling us to host a new innovative program that really seeks to bring into this space and make practical that which has been discussed since this morning. An entrepreneurship program that seeks to support as well as promote entrepreneurship in the just transition space, and as the video highlighted, starting in the Mpumalanga and Limpopo provinces of South Africa, specifically in mining communities. As Indalo Inclusive, we build upon our experience in the hosting, management, and the implementation of various programs in the past few years. Some of those include the SEED program in South Africa, which is a UN-founded program, a global partnership program that seeks to support eco and inclusive entrepreneurship, supporting as well of entrepreneurship in the tourism value chains within the greater Kruger landscapes, our hosting of the sustainable and competitive responsible business entrepreneurship, which is a program founded by the ILO, and now recently launched as well, the South African Women Entrepreneurship in Climate Change. And perhaps this fits quite nicely into the work that we have been implementing and supported by the Government of Flanders that seeks to support various initiatives and entrepreneurship opportunities within the climate adaptation space. And therefore, the Just Transition Entrepreneurship Program is supported and which we launched today. And as I've said before, which brings practicality to the work and the narrative that we have been discussing today, is being supported by the EU and the Federal Ministry of Environment in Germany. We are excited as Indalo to be able to host that. What then is the JTEP project? And as they prepare the slides for me to start sharing with you, as I've said, there's a lot of things that have just been discussed today. Among those is the work and the need that Matthew Shabane has highlighted quite extensively. And perhaps even the work and that the Department of Environment, Forest and Fisheries has been trying to put forward to us in as far as ideas for implementation within the just transition space. And in fact, even the work that business is trying to come together to try and implement. The JTEP project, as I've said, will be implemented in Mpumalanga and Limpopo province. We are fortunate that the EU is supporting us for the next 7 months to do that. If we can go through the next slide, so I can just quickly go through what is the typical theory of change that we want to look at as an organization. But before we do that, as I've said, we are launching today a very exciting program that will actually support these entrepreneurs. And we are looking for entrepreneurs that are going to demonstrate a few things. One, inclusivity and social impact, innovation and technology. We want to look at their ability to scale and being able to replicate. We want to look at the green and climate impact. We want to look at the job potential, the business and market potential, and maybe perhaps and most importantly, the ability to include women and youth in the work that they do. The next slide, please. Our overall theory of change as an organization and as a program seeks to look at, first of all, a facilitation of the JTEP program through an increased awareness of the opportunities in the social and inclusive as well as climate resilient enterprises in the just transition space. This is quite critical for us, and today marks the first time in which we begin to communicate and share awareness, share information, as well as raise awareness into the program. And we'll do that in order to strengthen innovation in the climate resilient businesses in South Africa. And that will be done through implementation of various boot camps in these 2 provinces. And we hope that we will identify at least 10 entrepreneurs that are going to be in these 2 provinces. And these will receive both technical and financial support to implement the ideas that they would have proposed. Maybe quite critically, and perhaps before we finish the session today, is to note that the government of South Africa, as Mr. Makwarela mentioned, has been hard at work looking at various opportunities to try and test some of these ideas. Quite interesting enough, we launched this program just almost parallel to a very interesting program that the Minister of Environment, Forest and Fisheries has recently launched called the Driving Force for Change. And Dr. Badul will then speak to that in a few minutes from now. We do hope that this particular program, together with the DFC, will increase the knowledge of products on climate smart entrepreneurship for a just transition in South Africa. And we are grateful to various partners that we have and that are part of this particular program. And the next slide, please. In essence, and as we launch today, we're going to have various briefing sessions that we're going to conduct within the ecosystem and in the different provinces with some of the different partners that we've begun to engage. And soon after that, we will be launching a call for applications. We'll go through an evaluation process and eventually then support this entrepreneurship to then showcase within the next few months. We hope that in somewhere in February or March, we will be able to then showcase these successful entrepreneurs. And South Africa will then celebrate and look at them as examples of a just transition and sustainable society. I would like then to invite Dr. Fatou to look at, speak a little bit about how the JTEB project is going to be supporting the Youth Driving Force for Change. Dr. Fatou.
Thanks, Rest, for that brief introduction. Good day to all of you, and thank you for inviting me to be part of the Climate Diplomacy Week engagements. As Rest has quite clearly indicated, our Minister Barbara Creecy, officially launched the Driving Force for Change Youth Pilot Initiative on the 16th of June. And the primary objective of undertaking this initiative was to encourage the youth to actually apply in the space of the environment sector, and so that we could tap into their expertise and knowledge in the sector. And we are quite aware that there are many of these untapped potential that's waiting to be discovered. So the applications actually opened on the 1st of July and closed on 31 August. And we are currently in the process of pre-screening and evaluations. This will take place during this month as well as next month. And hopefully our minister will be announcing the finalists in November. So we've also partnered with the EU as well as the German ministry in this regard. And we also have the British High Commission, who's providing us with support on the DFC Youth Initiative. We basically envisage to assist the applicants or the finalists with providing them with some support so that they could actually get in place final business plans or project plans, as we would have referred to it as. And this would enable them to move into the next level of the process of possibly securing funding from other sources and basically putting them in the direction that enables them to implement these innovative ideas that they may have. So this very, very well dovetails with the official launch of the Just Transition Entrepreneurship Program, which Rest has just mentioned. And we find many synergies in this regard between the two programs, as we are able to identify the areas of expertise that are available in the country itself and how we actually advance the youth in the space. And I think Rest, with that being said, I'd like to stop at this point and hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for that high level engagement, Dr. Fatou. I'd like to then invite King Solomon Kamete of Youth SAIA to make some comments.
Hello, everyone on this call, and thank you for the invitation. So Just Transition is not just a set of rules, but a vision and a process based on dialogue and an agenda shared by workers, industry, government, that needs to be negotiated and implemented. A case study in a small township in Secunda is a Amber Recycling Swap Shop. It's a community project, which I'm honored to co-direct, aiming at teaching the youth environmental responsibilities and basic economic principles through recycling waste in exchange for basic needs. We had to transition from a linear strategy to deal with waste into a circular economy approach. And that is because, hence I said, I'm from Mpumalanga and I'm from Secunda. So some of you would know that that's a place where extracting resources from our land is our source of income, from a period like that. So we had, as young people, to come up with innovative ways and I guess initiatives that would see a better future and a more sustainable future into a greener economy. This example for me has brought together private sectors or enterprises, government officials, and also community members. And that is why I believe transitioning is in this context of taking waste and making it into a treasure is very important, and young people can use this method to partnership in whatever way we'd want to bring change into a transitioning economy, into circular economy, and into a more sustainable future. Awareness and education are key, especially from a young age. I would love to be. That's why I believe development plans need to be incorporated education for environmental awareness, and with coherent skill strategies to prepare workers, in particular young people, for future sustainable sustainable world of work, enabling them to contribute and benefit from economic diversification and rural economic empowerment. And in saying that, entrepreneurship creates jobs, entrepreneurship creates new industries from within the sector, and entrepreneurship brings new ideas. As young people, we're very innovative, we're very creative. I think it's very important moving forward that as we use entrepreneurship to structure how we're going to approach the approach you're going to take into a circular economy and into transitioning into a much more sustainable, I guess, future. And also in particular, enabling them to contribute also and benefit from the economic diversification. Hence, I said, most importantly, training programs need to be targeted, need to target displaced workers and those who lost jobs. Because if you're going to move into a just transition, it's very important to take care of especially young people, because we're the majority population in this country. So it's very important to look at what the just transition is going to do to young people and jobs, and also security. In closing, the transition would not be easy. It's a huge social and economic shift that always poses challenges, but early action on just transition can minimize the unfavorable impacts and maximize favorable opportunities. And I would like to spare my time to share a video of how we used waste management to address the issues that we had on waste, and also to, I guess, do circular economy and also just transition. Thank you.
Each year, we South Africans generate waste with an estimated resource value of 25 billion rand. 90% of that ends up in landfills. So imagine how amazing it would be if we can encourage communities to tap into the economic potential of recycling. Well, one project in the Embalenhle community in Secunda is doing just that.
Founded by junior engineers, the Emba Swap Shop is a community development project encouraging children to exchange recyclable materials for credits to purchase basic necessities.
The merits of this program are far-reaching. Not only do these young people get to learn about the impact of recycling on the environment, but they also get the opportunity to hone some economic acumen. But it's important to remember that recycling is not only left to those communities who need to do it the most. It's up to every single one of us to help our planet breathe better. So next time you just want to throw something away, pick it up and recycle.
Thank you for that video, and thank you, Solomon, for your contributions. Now, from a young person who is getting down and dirty, rolling up his sleeves to getting the work done, I'd like to hand over to the Head of Partnerships and Program Development, Mr. Stuart Bartlett at the IDC, for his comments.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity. The IDC, as most people know, is a state-owned development finance institution with a double mandate of economic development and and then obviously the addressing some of the inequalities that exist. So a significant part of our IDC's portfolio is in the mining sector. Obviously, the sector we're talking about today, and particularly in respect of the just transition issue. Over the last couple of years, there's been a realization that sustainability is key. Communities around these investments is critical. And then obviously dealing with the issue of commitments to the SDGs and ESG issues, IDC has really put together a number of programs to try and make sure that the things get better, but also we also respond to the just transition requirements. We subscribe to the principles of responsible banking, committed to building back better, as you've heard, economically, socially, and environmentally, and then with focusing on the issue of people, place, planet, prosperity, and peace. Having said that, I could go into detail with the things that IDC is doing as an investor and as a finance institution, but I want to focus my attention on the impact of it and our work in the social economy. The New Growth Path in 2010 already stated that the social economy was a key driver for change, and as much as 260,000 jobs could be created in this regard. In 2010, this sector was very poorly developed, and in fact, we started looking at it as IDC, and we focus our attention on looking at the social economy as that part of the economy that responds to the unmet social and environmental needs, which have arisen from issues of poverty, poor health care services, poor infrastructure, environmental issues, and the like. In this regard, we developed two incredibly useful funds. So one being the Social Enterprise Fund, and the other being the Social or the Special Intervention Fund. Now, the Social Enterprise Fund is purely, as it says, social and environmental enterprises. We support them through a grant support program. But on a broader basis, we've realized that this area is so underdeveloped that we needed to deal with the issues of the ecosystem as well, and develop a fund called the Special Intervention Fund. Now, the Special Intervention Fund is really useful, particularly when we're dealing with creating partnerships, collaborations, and so on. And in this regard, in terms of the whole social economy support that we are getting, we are very grateful to the government of Flanders who really supported us in this initiative, but also to other partners, the DTIC, Rest and his team at Ndalo, ILO, amongst others, and putting together some sort of coordinated support program, policy intervention, and so on. Getting back to some of how we can use some of these funds, and I really appeal to the listeners, to people on this call, that we are desperate. Well, we're looking for partnerships, and we are prepared to partner with a whole range of different organizations to achieve the following. As I mentioned, partnerships are critical, particularly between the public sector, private sector, and civil society and community structures generally. Finding ways in which to crowd in and share resources, building institutional capacity, and making sure that plans don't remain plans, but also support that are implemented, and building social capital, amongst other things. We have used these funds quite considerably in mining communities and in generally in society, for people-centered approaches, local placemaking, inclusive business, and incubators, circular economy, and the rest. This has become a very important because we are finding that although everybody's got good intentions, we're finding that so many of the initiatives are very small and not making the type of impact. So we are really would prefer working as partners and trying to make sure that there's scale and replication and impact. So these funds and this program, already we've have used them in collaboration with a number of the partners we've talked about, and showing very good impact. We would like these funds to look at facilitating and catalyzing, as I mentioned, but also to make sure that we're the first mover. Very often, nobody wants to put money in until somebody does it first. We've found that if we use our capacity to do these things, we can, and we will. And then we've, in general terms, for every rand we've managed to put in, we've managed to raise another 9 rand from other sources. The appeal now then is obviously, can we use these mechanisms to support just transition issues? And yes, I think we would welcome any participation and any collaborations. We would also like to see those outcomes that everybody's mentioned being achieved, involvement of poor and marginalized youth, women, rural communities, township economies, and that in this initiative as well. We do think that I've mentioned our investment in the mining communities. We're very grateful to the AFD for collaborating with us on a research project on looking at ghost towns, mining towns. I hope we will learn very many lessons and what to do, how to address them from that. And these are the type of things that we need to focus our attention on, to make sure that we, when the life of a mine comes to an end, we are able to diversify the economy and make sure that the communities in these locations their needs continue to be addressed, that we ensure that there's economic sustainability, viability, and environmental issues are addressed, and the like. So yeah, I guess I should stop there, but to say that we do believe that the opportunity is now. We can't wait any longer, and we need to make these interventions into these mining communities as early as possible, and not wait for the actual collapse of these economies. It's so much more difficult, so much more harder, and so much more expensive if we don't address some of these strategies, put in place some of these strategies as early as possible. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Stuart. And it seems one of our audience members is quite heartbroken by the applications being closed, and this is now specific to the activity that was mentioned by Dr. Fatou. But with that said, I think both yourself, Stuart, and also Rest, you're speaking to a new window, at the very least, from the Indalopreneur program and the boot camp. I think, Rest, if you can just elaborate on what is the process of engaging. You did speak to it on a high level, and then if Stuart, you could follow with just unpacking a bit more the opportunity sets that are within the IDC specific to the program that you've just outlined, just on the times and dates, because it seems like there is a fair amount of heartbreak from the audience members in missing the initial deadline mentioned by Dr. Fatou.
Thanks, Luvuyo. Maybe I will just start, and then Dr. Fatou can just respond soon after me. But yeah, no complete heartbreaks yet. The JTAB project is actually launching today. We will be putting out a call for applications. So look out for a call for application that's going to come in literally almost in the next few days from now, through our website, through social media, and through a network of partners that are here. yeah, so the simple way to do that is to go to our website at www.indaloinclusive.org.za. There will be a call for applications that's going to be put out now in the next couple of days. So yeah, that's not closed. And there's a number of opportunities indeed that we keep on putting up on our site, so people can just look out for that. Yeah, Dr. Badul, do you want to respond to the DFC specifically on the closed application date?
Okay, thanks, Luvuyo. Yeah, so as I indicated earlier on as well, basically what we've done is our applications closed on the 31st of August. And we're looking at the 4 thematic areas: climate change mitigation, adaptation, as well as biodiversity and ecosystems, and then looking at waste solutions, whilst waste and biodiversity can easily fit under the adaptation and mitigation aspects as well. But nonetheless, we've decided to lift it out and provide more focus and attention in these particular areas. So we will be spending time in, we've already started actually with the pre-screening administrative processes. And from today, our managers will be looking at the competency of the applications that we've received. And then by early October, we move into the external evaluation process. So just to add to what Rest has indicated with his JTAP initiative, I mean, the key thing here is reaching out to the potential applicants. And what we did was we also used social media time and again, announcing the initiative. We also provided an extended period for the process of application itself. And I think this has helped in reaching out to youth in all provinces nationally. So Rest, this is one of the things that you could do depending on what your closing date is for your application process. And entrepreneurs also are inclusive of the youth. And I know that given the high unemployment rates, we receive calls on a daily basis from youth, asking about other initiatives. And I'm glad that you've announced your initiative now. So it provides some sort of continuity so that the youth could also, as entrepreneurs, tap into this process as well. And I think there's a dire need for these kinds of activities on the ground. And I'm hoping that the partners who are on board would consider extending programs in this regard as well, inclusive of the public sector. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that.
Can I also respond? We don't go out to calls, Luvuyo. We don't go out to calls. We have an open system in respect of these social economy funds. We welcome applications. You can send them to me, stuartb@idc.co.za. We will make sure that it gets into the pipeline and is evaluated accordingly. The support we are looking at is primarily, we don't focus our attention on individual entrepreneurs that are able to get normal funding from other sources. We are particularly focusing on the social impact side. So the broader, more community-driven, the more impactful, we will look at it, as I say, for both of these funds. We will try and promote or try and work within the ecosystem to make sure that we collaborate and coordinate. So Rest and IDC already have some very strong relationships, same with GIZ, same with others. So we'll look at coordinating and collaborating to make some of these initiatives work. And as I said, try and de-risk so that we can access people feel more comfortable putting in resources to partner in partnership with us.
Thank you for that. There was just a follow-up request that if you can just please reshare the email address, and I think if you can just pop it in the chat box to all panelists and attendees, so that anyone who missed it can have it available to them to essentially reach out as per your request. And with that, I'd like to thank this section. I know this is a very, very, almost a sprint through some dense information and great opportunities. But I think with the various different website platforms and communication channels that are being shared, the doors remain open for attendees and their networks to continue engaging. But I would like, in the interest of time, to transition over to Gelo again to handle our next session, which is the just transition, just and green recovery opportunities for skills, jobs, and territories. And this will be our last session today before the closing remarks and consolidation. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Gelo. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Luvuyo. And as you raised before, I think there is a natural transition between sessions, definitely. We started fleshing out really some of the opportunities for entrepreneurs, for new business development in the session that we just finished. In the session going forward, we going to go deeper into this and saying, where are those opportunities? If the just transition is going to displace some businesses, it's going to displace some activities, it's going to have negative impact on some communities, we need new opportunities. We need new businesses, new activities. We need to reinvent ourselves to some extent so that the people and the communities affected have alternative jobs, alternative activities going forward. So very, very pleased to have a wide-ranging set of panelists to look at those opportunities, both in South Africa and from other countries globally, looking at other experiences. Our first speaker this afternoon will be Chris Etmeyer, who works at the East London Industrial Development Zone in Eastern Cape. He looks particularly at renewable energy and ICT and has been deeply involved in discussions around just transition, employment, and innovation. So Chris, very happy to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm actually very excited to talk about, I think, a whirlwind of topics, because there's a whole bunch of things I'd love to just get out here, just to explain where we've come from, where we're heading towards, and like you say, the opportunities. And I'm just hoping that it really stimulates some discussion and ideas around future collaboration and where we can take that. So firstly, I'd like to start off with my role as the president of the Borderkai Chamber of Business. So I'm serving a 2-year term as the president of our local business chamber. And it's quite important, and I think it was stressed earlier, that need for that public and private sector and that interaction and handoff points. So I'm quite privileged that I've got that position, and we can really bring in business and lobby and advocate for businesses around the sort of transition that we're talking about. Just very quickly on what we've done, we've got various subcommittees. And one of the things we created was a South African Green Schools Initiative, which we actually successfully greened 2 of our schools, actually managed to work in the themes into their curriculum so that the principles are actually taught at the school. We've also done the greening of the business chamber, so practiced what we preached. We did a grid-tied system with battery storage. So now we can advocate to businesses around there that are looking to transition. How did we do it? We've also got a sustainability charter where we are looking at sustainable use of limited resources, as well as things like transport, to try and influence and get businesses behind these kind of themes. And then lastly, we also look at, we've got a green desk, which is involved in renewable energy certificates and trading of those certificates. But then if I jump to my actual job as the sector manager in a business development function, it's in renewable energy and ICT. And those 2 sectors are so closely interrelated nowadays. And essentially, we are an export processing zone. We build factories and get manufacturers to set up in the IDZ. So we do have quite a few European Union based and headquartered companies that are in our zone. And we also have investors that are involved in the renewable energy space. We've got solar PV manufacturers, or one manufacturer. We've got a vanadium redox flow battery manufacturer that we are currently setting up to start building their facility. We've got the first of its kind in the world. It's a company that actually takes plastic waste and converts it back into oils and solvents, or oils and waxes and lubricants. So that's a very interesting project that's also involved with the RDC funding. And then we've got a renewable energy center, which is based in our science and technology park. So we're one of the only SEZs, special economic zones, with the science park. And within that, we've got an artisan training academy where we handle all the renewable energy training and skills development. And they are involved in a lot of that. So I wanted to just explain that so that you understand what we do in the infrastructure that we've got available, but I think we can be doing tons more. So I suppose our journey into the energy space started quite a while ago when we were asked to actually take the lead and develop the Eastern Cape Sustainable Energy Strategy. So we actually developed that for our province, and it was officially adopted by our provincial legislature, and it is the energy strategy now of the Eastern Cape. We then, and I'm glad to see there was Steve Nichols from NBR, because NBR came and approached us and said, how about doing these energy efficiency assessments, not only for the East London IDZ and our own operations, but all our tenants within the zone. And we've got 43 companies now operating in our zone. So how do we make them more energy efficient? And that really kickstarted us, I think, on this journey, because from there, we linked up to the South African Low Emissions Development Unit, which is funded by USAID, and they actually developed our carbon footprint assessment and then a renewable energy roadmap for the IDZ to follow. And we were actually fortunate enough, because our city is a shareholder in us, we actually pushed that study further into our city, East London or Buffalo City. So our city now, it hasn't been adopted, but technically speaking, they've got their carbon footprint assessment and they've got a renewable energy roadmap that could be used by themselves. From that, we partnered up and linked up with the National Cleanup Reduction Center and UNIDO, and they ran their eco-industrial park study on us. So we now qualified as an eco-industrial park. And we also started getting more and more into the space and the discussion around smart cities. Then how do we become a smart industrial park? And that's really something that I think it's really picking up a lot of opportunity. And then, you know, things just started snowballing because the GRZ then came with their water stewardship program. And said, how do we integrate these and start linking up? So I think what we've got is a lot of studies that we've done. We've got the infrastructure that we can actually develop pilots and demonstrations and projects. We've got the ability to do the skills training and development. And I suppose the big thing that I'm missing is the funding. The funding has always been very... We are trying to be more innovative in that space. So we've just released a tender where we're going to take all of these opportunities that we see in the green space and the ICT or smart industry space, and we're going to package it into investment-ready projects. And we're hoping through that initiative, we can actually jump over this hurdle of transitioning into these sort of new spaces. So that is a quick whirlwind description of what we're doing, the opportunities that I see, and I'm very interested to get into the discussions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. I think that was really a brilliant overview. Just maybe very briefly, I mean, I know you've got to go pretty soon, so just want to get back to you on that. I mean, to what extent are you collaborating with other SEZs or IDZs in South Africa or beyond, really, to try and really make that journey happen? I mean, what you've done already seems quite fascinating. But, you know, how do we make all our IDZs, I guess, smart eco-industrial parks in the country?
All right, so my next meeting has been cancelled, so I'm staying for the full session. But yes, you know, So we've got Dube Trade Port, which is in KwaZulu-Natal. So that's the KwaZulu-Natal's SEZ. We've got a memorandum of understanding signed with them for collaboration, especially on the smart industrial park space. We do have and host other SEZs coming to us quite a bit because there's a lot of learnings that we've already achieved. So it's taxpayers' money being spent on all of us. So we give that learning out and don't try and have that initiative redone time and time again in each different SEZ. Then I think, the interesting thing with the Department of Trade and Industry is that they are so busy with their revitalization of old industrial parks. So we do get called in quite a bit, share learnings and collaborate with them. And I think that's also where the smart industrial park concept becomes very interesting, because from a trade and industry perspective or at a national level, you can actually monitor and watch the performance of these industrial parks. You can watch their water consumption. You can see the energy management systems. So you can do all of this remotely. And I think that's where really the scale will be achieved, and we can really start leveraging off each other by collaborating. So to answer you, yes, we are very open to collaborate, and we do so quite often.
Great stuff. Thank you, Chris. I'm glad you can stay with us a bit longer. Our next speaker is also from the sort of more regional, provincial level, but from a different province, a province that has a lot of spotlight when it comes to just transition, which is in Mpumalanga, of course. I'm very pleased to welcome Nkosinati Nkonyane from the Mpumalanga province government. He's from the Department of Economic Development and Tourism within the provincial government. Very pleased to have you with us today to explain to us what the province is busy doing, particularly around this new green economy cluster that we've started to hear about. And Nati, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. I think it's afternoon already. Thank you so much for inviting us to be part of this dialogue. It is always important to share experiences, and thank you once again for that. But firstly, let me also appreciate the support that we are receiving from the German government, and also appreciate the support that we received from the EU. Sometime last year, we were exposed to just transition in Europe. And let me just report that we are putting that experience into good use in terms of all the initiatives that we're undertaking as a provincial government. Let me just mention that as a province, in our planning and in our developmental agenda, we have placed environmental management at the center of all those activities. Essentially, what we are trying to do is just to strike a balance between our economic development agenda and, of course, managing our natural assets. That's where we are as a province, and we have started quite a number of initiatives. We are working very closely with the national government. Obviously, in terms of policy, national government will guide us. But as a province, we also develop our policies that are in line with the national government. And in all the policies that we have developed recently, all those policies are looking at how we can protect our natural assets, how we can transition to a greener economy. And that is the work that we are currently involved in. We have also identified a number of opportunities. Basically, with regards to farming and food security, I think some of the speakers mentioned earlier on that we are an agriculture province. So we are basically looking to smart agriculture. How we, get into farming that is sustainable. So that is where we are as a provincial government. And in terms of our towns and urban centers, We are already starting programs that are looking at, issues of rolling out solar PVs in communities around the province. Those will be smaller, solar PV projects. But also we are looking into issues of clean cooking stoves around the communities in the province. If you go in some of the areas in our province, particularly the Highveld region, if you drive in those areas in the evening, you will see a lot of smoke because people are still using coal to cook. And that contributes to the high emissions. So we are basically trying to deal with all those type of things. There may be small initiatives, but what we are doing essentially is to contribute to this agenda of greening the province. We are also looking into issues of your sustainable province. I think one of the speakers earlier on mentioned that in Mpumalanga we have all these game reserves. We are hosting part of the Kruger National Park, and we have a lot of other tourism products that are in our province. So we basically believe that all the protected lands need to remain protected. And we are doing everything possible to ensure that there are no economic activities, particularly mining activities and other activities that would then degrade those assets. So we have been looking into that aspect to say everything that we do should be should look at preserving all those natural assets that we have as a province. We are a beautiful province for those who have never been to Mpumalanga. There are a whole lot of tourism products that you can enjoy in our beautiful province. But obviously, we also have the issues of mining that are a challenge if you look at them from another perspective. We are the energy hub of the country. We are hosting a number of power stations, but we are also aware that some of these power stations will be decommissioned in the next few years or so. A significant proportion of those power stations would be decommissioned in the coming years, simply because of the aging facilities. Those facilities are aging. We know some of them are over 40 years old. Some are even approaching 60 years old. And obviously, we definitely have to look at an alternative. I think one of our colleagues did speak to this aspect from the Department of Environmental Affairs earlier on. But also to mention as a province, how we are then, how we want to mitigate this aspect is that we have organized ourselves. We are establishing a cluster. It's what we call a green economy cluster in the province of Mpumalanga. What this cluster will be doing, basically, it will be bringing together all stakeholders. We are already talking to a number of stakeholders, not necessarily only stakeholders that are based in Mpumalanga, but stakeholders that are even outside of the province. And we are also looking at international organizations that could join hands with us as we work towards this. I've said that as a province, we are responsible for a high level of the emissions in the country because of the mining activities, the electricity generation, and all other heavy industries that are concentrated in Mpumalanga. We're hosting a number of those, from your paper to synfuels to the mines and the power generation. All those are found in Mpumalanga in big numbers. So we are basically looking at how we can, sort of look at the issue of coordinating all the activities that would be targeting the issue of reducing these emissions. So the clusters will assist in terms of that. There are already existing clusters in the province. For instance, there are clusters that are focusing on energy. There are clusters that are focusing on water. There is one cluster which is called the Mining Water Coordinating Body. Usually the mines are in that cluster. And it's one cluster that has done well in terms of studies, and it's doing part of the just transition work. We have since identified a number of opportunities for small businesses, even in the work that they do, and also in the work that the other clusters are responsible for in the province. We also have other small clusters in the form of your Go Greens and others that are operating in the province. So as a provincial government, we want to be in a position to coordinate all the work that is being done by the clusters. Otherwise, you find a situation where everyone is doing everything in the province and is not properly coordinated. So the cluster that we are trying to form, which is going to be led by government, but in a form of a triple helix modeling, that means we will involve government, your private sector. It will be a platform for private sector, government, and obviously academia, because we also need to have informed information that is based on science that is going to guide us. But also we are looking at the issue of involving civil organizations, or rather civil society organizations, in the work that we will be doing. So all these efforts have gained traction, and we are working towards promoting that cluster that we are leading as a province. And I'm happy to announce that the government, the German government, is assisting us towards this work of putting together the cluster that will coordinate all this work. But also we are looking at the issue of reskilling within this. That is what the cluster will be doing. The reskilling program, very, very critical, because we know that we'll be shedding a lot of jobs. Obviously, from where we were just talking about the mines that will be decommissioned. I mean, the power stations that will be decommissioned. And obviously, there are mines that are already closing in the province. So that's part of the work that we must, reskill some of those employees to be able to even get into the energy space and find new work. So that's part of the work that we're doing. But also, this cluster will also serve as a networking, sort of a networking platform where we'll be able to, interact with our international counterparts and some of our counterparts in the country and in the province. And we are also going to use this cluster as a one-stop shop. All these projects that we're talking about under just transition and the other sectors, of course, that relates to the greening economy, or rather to the green economy. They will find space for, discussing some of the bigger projects or the mega projects or the high impact projects that you will engage upon. So yes, that is, but in the nutshell, I mean, I'm from the economic development. I'm from the Department of Economic Development. We are basically looking at the issue of creating employment and crowding in investments in the province, particularly in the green sector. That is what the cluster is going to do. But the also important issue which we want to underline with regards to this entity is that it will deal with the issue of your trust deficit at the moment. As government, sometimes of the public sector, we always look at private sector as not creating jobs. Private sector always looking at government as not being able, to adapt to technology and in terms of your policy and regulations. So that would be the complaints that you will find from the private sector side. In government, we also say private sector are not creating employment. So this cluster is going to assist us, to find one another in terms of the work that we do. So we have prioritized a few sectors. The sectors that we have prioritized, basically, it's energy, that would be one of the sectors. Water is one of the sectors, the circular economy, as well as agriculture. Not to say that this cluster will focus on only these sectors, but we are saying for now, this is going to be the primary focus. Other sectors will come in as we move along with the work. So in the nutshell, let me just say that is where we are as a province. And this cluster will try that it will be as independent as possible. And it will play a very critical facilitation role. It will go out, look for funds, on all the climate, the climate funding that is available. We will be able to, this cluster will be able to do that, attract those kind of fundings. And we are going to pay attention to small businesses. Obviously look at the opportunities that are inherent within this work, and also make sure that some of the small businesses are getting opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nadi. Thank you. That was very comprehensive. Really great for articulating what the Mpumalanga government is doing at the moment to really take forward a just transition in the province. You mentioned skills development, and I think that was very timely in terms of transition. Our next speaker is Naeem Rasool from the South African Renewable Energy Technology Center in the Western Cape. And really, the job of the center is to create skills and build skills in renewable energy, as the name suggests. But Naeem, you can obviously tell us more about what the center has been doing and how it's also, I know, expanding its operations. So looking forward to your interventions, Naeem.
Okay, thank you very much, Galo. Good afternoon, everyone. I've got a short 4-slide presentation that I want to go through. This is our Just Transition Skills Development Project. It's a project that we have presented to to certain people on this forum, like Steve and Mandy and even Inkosinati. And what's interesting is there's another logo there called Monson. A lot of you might not know who is Monson. Monson is, like Ceratec, an independent renewable energy training center in Romania. And they have, over the last 3 years, successfully implemented a Just Transition Skills Development Project in Romania. And Monson and Ceratec go back 7 years. We are both part of a BZE network of independent renewable energy training centers in the world. And so we collaborate a lot on wind training. And hence we've decided to partner to introduce a on-the-ground Just Transition Skills Development Project, in Mpumalanga. Basically, my first slide, just to tell you what Ceratec is all about. Ceratec is a public sector national renewable energy training center that is part of the Department of Higher Education and Training and funded by the National Skills Fund. It is currently managed by the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. We provide skills development in the renewable energy sector in South Africa. We are an accredited QCDO skills development provider. And we basically train for industries, and the multinational OEMs in the wind sector are our main customers, where we train the wind turbine service technician, South African qualification, and then we've got the solar PV qualification also, and we work closely with Sevia on that side. Ceratec also does a number of international qualifications and certifications through the Global Wind Organization and BZE Academy, and Ceratec is currently regarded as the leading renewable energy training center in the Southern Hemisphere, and also also globally it's quite well known. The context of a Just Transition Skills Development Project, we all know this. You're basically looking at 80% of the coal mines in Mpumalanga, and there's a few key things that we recognize that, and I mean, enough has been said around this in terms of how critical it is that there is a reskilling of workers that are in the coal sector, both on coal mines and coal power stations, so that these regions are socioeconomically kept alive. So in a nutshell, and I try to keep my slides very slim, the project has 4 phases. We have a phase 1, which is a lot of assessment and analysis on a pilot level, looking at a particular town, and Hendrina could be one, to do an assessment and analysis of, what is the level of job losses, what is the people that are losing their jobs, what is their skills level, etc. So very high level assessment analysis. In Romania, it was PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, that did that assessment and analysis, and I've seen a copy of that report that was done in Romania on a pilot scale, and the type of work that comes out of there can be very informative for us as training practitioners, because what that allows us to do is phase 2 and phase 3. Phase 2 is about the training infrastructure. You have to have training infrastructure put in place. And in terms of training infrastructure, Ceratec has a very close relationship with all the TVET colleges in the country, which also fall under the auspices of Department of Higher Education and Training. And through the TVET colleges, we can assess what type of training infrastructure is, needed. And then the next phase would be, the actual skills training that is undertaken first on a pilot scale, but then over 10 years, over thousands of people based on the success of the pilot. And then the final phase is placing those trained people into jobs and enterprise creation, which is the ultimate impact that one wants to do with reskilling. So it looks at the entire value chain. Partnerships are very critical here, and currently for phase 1, Ceratec are surrounding themselves with a few key partners: the Mpumalanga provincial government, Green Cape, a very important player because they are the custodians of driving the SERM, which is the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan. And then, of course, Monson, Romania. And then there are a few key just transition stakeholders in the country that are driving just transition at a very macro level. NBI, definitely one of them. The GIZ is also doing something in terms of the IKI project, which Ceratec is also collaborating with them on. And CSR is also doing some fantastic, work in just transition. There's a CSR webinar that's happening this coming Wednesday. So it's important that, we align to those type of macro initiatives. However, this project is at a very micro, level. And basically that's it. That's what we're trying to kick off the ground. I think we are, at the moment, we've got a few funding proposals out, and we're hoping to secure the first phase 1 of funding very soon, so we can basically kickstart, this, reskilling project in a pilot area in Mpumalanga. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, Naomi, to highlight the fantastic work that you're doing at Ceratec. I couldn't have asked for a better transition. You talk about, funding, and, it is the problem. So let's go and talk to a funder and segue nicely to Carl Bernadac from the AFD, the Agence Française de Développement, the French Development Agency. He's the Deputy Regional Director based in South Africa for the AFD, and very active in the just transition in the country. Definitely, the AFD has done a lot of work already and going to do some more going forward. So Carl, looking forward to hearing what the AFD is up to.
Thank you, Gaylor. And speaking last, I see we have a lot of opportunities of collaboration and support. Let me share my screen. Yes, for a quick presentation. I try to be brief. Yes, can you all see the presentation? Yes,
we can.
Okay. Thank you. AFD, as you mentioned very quickly, we are the Public Development Bank. We have 3 entities: AFD working with public sector, Proparco with private sector, and now integrating Expertise France, who is a bit the equivalent of GIZ. So we have committed last year 6.7 billion of financing in South Africa. It's indeed the continent where we concentrate effort, budgetary support indeed. And it's not because of this webinar, but quite in line. We are not talking about sectoral activity anymore. We're talking about supporting transitions. Among them, I highlighted the one of interest, territorial and ecological transition. And this is the share of our commitment to achieve that. I will also briefly give an overview of what we understand the challenge of just transition in South Africa. Previous speakers have insisted in the fact that the economy is indeed quite energy and carbon intensive, with some ambition and climate policy, and we have heard our colleagues from DEF, all the policies that are in place, the institutional arrangement with the national government coordination on just transition, and the announced presidential committee on climate change and so forth, and policy measures such as the carbon tax, now the work by National Treasury and financing a sustainable economy. So a lot of policies that are going on, but with the challenge to meet the Paris Agreement, and with a growing tension between, I would say, short-term agenda to respond to the COVID crisis and the longer-term agenda. But talking about transition, and I won't come back to what the previous speakers have mentioned about the dependence on coal, but I would like to insist on another aspect of the transition risk. Indeed, we have to transition to a greener economy to meet mitigation objective. I won't come back to that, but there is also and I think when we talk about the territory that has been mentioned, the need to transition to navigate and to mitigate the transition risk. And we have promoted a study last year of the risk for the South African economy of the global low carbon shift. What's going to happen to the South African economy if the world is slowly, I would say, turning away from coal, for instance? And it's quite huge. I mean, the estimate of the cost for the South African economy, and we can release its public study that have been disseminated also with our partner, DBSA. But the cost from 2013 to 2035 is around $120 billion US. So it's quite huge. The direct effect to public finance is only 16% of that. But if we think about the I would say the channels through which the private cost will be at some point supported by the public finance, it could be much higher indeed. And another thing which is interesting in this study is we still have a lot of incentives in the economy for future investment in future stranded assets. And I know that National Treasury, indeed, among others, and the Department of Environment, DEF, are working on that, right, with a green economy plan for the latter, and with the work on financing a sustainable economy from National Treasury. But there is a lot of work to be done on that. And you have a very vibrant, I would say, policy dialogue, a very vibrant civil society. We all remember of the Life After Coal coalition and campaign. And so as a transition to what can we do at a territorial level, right? And I want to give here the example of Steve Chwete local municipality. So just a map for those who are not familiar. So Steve Chwete is in Mpumalanga. It's a municipality whose 40% of local gross value added depends on the coal economy, and 17% of local employment as well. And it's an interesting case, I would say, to have a good pilot of a successful low carbon transition or just transition, because we have a strong basis. I mean, it's a well-managed, historically well-managed municipality, financially robust as well. It's also at the crossroad of big transport corridor, east-west and north-south, and the decline of the coal economy is scheduled already. And we had our colleague from ESCOM, Mandy, who talked about the planned decommissioning of old coal-fired power station, and it's the case of Komati in the municipal territory, and the associate small mines are starting to decline as well. So what can we do? And I would like to insist on the fact that it's not for a development finance institution or a development partner such as ID. It's not a classic program of doing a feasibility study and financing an investment. We can't do that. Indeed, this is I would say, what we have been doing. But the way we're understanding it's, and many speakers before have insisted on that, it's supporting just transition. It's also supporting a new engagement, a multi-stakeholder engagement. And that's what we are trying to do in Steve Chwete with so it's a partnership approach. And we have had just last week a first series of workshops facilitated by ICLEI, associating DBSA Indeed, and bringing together the different layers of government, from national government to the provincial. Mpumalanga representative were there, people from the, I would say, emerging Just Transition Office at the Mpumalanga province, colleagues from the Nkangala district were there as well, and different branch of Sifrete local municipality. And the idea is to share a diagnostics and to share a vision of where the territory wants to go. And then from there we can see what kind of support we can bring. A new venue of dialogue, indeed, with township entrepreneurs and with ESCOM. I mean, it's really leads to the point developed by Mandy, insisting on the fact that ESCOM wants to open up to local consultation, to greater transparency at a stage where options, and sounding the market as well at a stage where options to not only decommission but also repurpose all coal-fired power stations such as Komati are considered. So the support we are willing to provide is first resources to conduct this dialogue and new, I would say, venue for consultation. And then in terms of analysis and to try to reconcile, I would say, what I mentioned, short-term challenges and of employment and long-term strategic goals of diversification of the economy, shifting away from coal. One of the first things that was needed is to assess, in the context of the current crisis due to COVID, how the local economic, socio-economic fabric has been impacted by the COVID crisis and its effect. So that's the first thing we are going to do. Through this consultation we've had, we also understood and we will continue our discussion with national government and Mpumalanga colleagues, a need for a greater alignment of public policies between the public policies and public guidelines, I would say, around just transition. A lot of initiatives are coming up, but the alignment is still on progress, a progress process, I would say, a process in progress. So we are also willing to support that. Evaluating economic diversification potential. So, and this is something that have been stressed by many partners around the table today. In consistency with the existing labor force, GIZ has done great job on assessing the potential for SMMEs development in Stiftshuete local municipalities, and we are willing to do either at the municipality level or the district level an assessment of the existing labor force. We have a second phase of our research facilities on inequalities funded by the European Union, and I want to thank them for that. That could provide a deeper analysis of the labor market, the existing skills and the need for reskilling. And thank you to the organizer for this opportunity to exchange with other. We don't have a physical coffee, but we will follow up, I think, with some of the other institutions that have been presented in today's discussion. And I was very interested by what name presented on by Saretek on the pilot on reskilling you want to develop on maybe Andrina in Mpumalanga. So I think we have to liaise on that as well. And indeed, we are discussing with ESCOM on how to support this endeavor of reinforcing capacity within ESCOM around the Just Transition Office and having a clear strategy on how do you engage on the social and policy dialogue with local actors, and on assessing repurposing option for that makes sense. I mean, and maximize the impact for socio-economic impact at the territorial level, and the first one being Komati. So we are structuring a partnership on this line with ESCOM and hope to start quite soon. But what I want to mention from our perspective, indeed, as a financier, we can bring financial resources, be it for operational research on skills, for instance, or technical cooperation in partnership with IDC and DBSA on feasibility studies, sector assessment, and so forth. We can finance investment indeed, but we also strongly believe that in this case, as I mentioned before, a key issue is the quality of the local dialogue between different local stakeholders and the vertical dialogue between different layers of government as well. And it does not belong to us, indeed, as an external development partners, but this is something we can and we are keen on facilitating in as much as we can. Sorry, it's been a bit of a rush, but I'm conscious that I'm the last speaker and it's -5, so I will stop there. Unless there is any question that I will be very glad to.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you.
But you're not the last speaker.
No, sorry. So for the reason, to give some floor to the last speaker, sorry.
So we are running a bit behind schedule. We apologize for that. So without further ado, let's take it outside of South Africa and hear from colleagues, both from Greece and Bulgaria, who are going to briefly show us what has happened in those countries. We've got Dimitris Tsekiris from WWF in Greece, as well as Desislava Mikova from Greenpeace in Bulgaria. We're just going to explain a little bit the experience in those regions. Not sure who goes first. The floor is yours, guys.
I could start. I don't know if my colleague, I cannot really see her now.
You can go ahead, Dimitris. Yes.
Okay. So thank you for the invitation. Congratulations for this great event. I actually got wiser getting to know about the discussion that is going on in South Africa, and I can see a lot of similarities in the questions that are being on the table in multiple areas and regions across the world. I will start basically with giving a brief overview of the state of play in Greece right now. We have the announcement from the Prime Minister last year from the UN for a complete coal phase out. That means that all existing thermal power plants will be retired by 2023. And by 2028, there is one more that's currently under construction that will be also terminated by then. We have a revised National Energy and Climate Plan, which more or less says that we will reach by 2030 42% of emission reduction compared to 1990 levels. But our main concern is that this complete phase out of coal is mainly being replaced by fossil gas, which poses the question of the actual decarbonization towards 2050, as well as in terms of achieving the climate neutrality. So very recently, we have the announcement of a master plan for those lignite regions, which will be under public consultation for a period of time. And that makes more or less Greece, which also had economic turbulence and problems the previous decade, that Greece will be one of the front runners in the process of just transition among its EU members. So in general, if we see it, the message is that this is the first organized European attempt to change productive models that have been established for decades now, and they are based on fossil fuels. So for us, it is of great importance to create those conditions that make and guarantee that the transition will be smooth and create a better future so that no one will be left behind in this process. So since this is the first targeted approach for changing this production model, we need successful examples. And in order to have successful examples, we need to understand also what's going on around us. And that means, for instance, to take into account the pandemic. We need to take into account that we need to go faster towards solutions that do not create harm to nature. And now, more or less, I think you are aware of the European developments. We have the European Green Deal. Greece is part of this process. We will have a higher climate ambition, which is welcome. We would require even further than 55% according to science. And of course, the Just Transition Fund, we will be financing all the activities in the coal regions in the different parts of Europe. So unfortunately, with the last voting in the European Parliament, there is exclusion for financing fossil gas infrastructure. But I think this can, following up, this could be something that we can change so we can give a real meaning to the Just Transition Fund. Now, a few words about what we do in Greece for Just Transition. We have a long-lasting involvement in coal regions in Greece, so beginning of zeros. So we push for clean energy sources, we push for energy efficiency solutions, storage, and so on. In Greece, we mainly have two regions that are producing coal, and they're also burning coal in order to produce electricity. That is Western Macedonia and Megalopolis in Arcadia and Peloponnese. And WWF Greece is responsible for the implementation of the project for Just Transition together with 3 more WWF offices. So that is Germany, Poland, and Bulgaria. This is a part of a UKI program, the European Climate Initiative, that is being funded from the German Ministry of Environment. Our main scope is to organize, we organize capacity building workshops, we produce the relevant reports. We are actually in the process now to release 2 reports that have to do with the job opportunities in the light of a coal phase out, as well as district heating, about greening district heating and sustaining those infrastructure away from fossil fuels and fossil gas in particular. And we try to promote solutions to create those sustainable jobs. We try to establish networks between member states. We highlight the importance of Just Transition between national governments and institutions. And this includes, of course, advocacy, informing, those studies, policy papers, documentaries, and the whole list of activities that strengthen the arguments of moving towards sustainable solutions away from fossil fuels, but this always entails the participation of the local communities in this process. So we try to make and to sustain a bottom-up approach in order for the process of Just Transition to be as participatory as possible. So an example for this is the upcoming Forum of Mayors that will be held this year due to COVID online. Normally it would be in Silesia in Poland. The first one was in Kozani in 2018. Second one in Weißwasser in Germany. And the number of participants and the number of mayors is constantly increasing. So we started with 10 mayors and now we are reaching in the declaration approximately challenges that we are actually facing is the timeline of this coal phase out in terms of ensuring this Just Transition. So we only have 3 years until everything is shut down. We have the master plan that is now under public consultation. We are trying to make this process as participatory as possible, so the voice of the local communities to be heard in the national institutions, the national governments, as well as the EU institutions. And of course, the issue of the governance of the whole project. So what we suggest is more active involvement for all the relevant stakeholders. That means, for example, the largest utility, which is PTC. We need to agree on one plan on the Just Transition process, and we need one financial tool that is adequate in order to finance those activities that need to be green and need to be sustainable for the decades to come in order to ensure such transformation to be successful. So, and finishing with this, all in all, just transition for the coal regions will be the first crash test about our ability collectively to sketch and ensure a better future for all citizens. This process has to be inclusive and participatory, and the first effort of an holistic approach in and for local communities must be successful. This is of utmost importance because we need successful examples in order for it and the people should always be at the epicenter of this transition. We need to collaborate, we need to cooperate, and we need to include the local communities, the local actors, and everybody that is involved in order to create this better future together and move forward away from fossil fuels. And of course, it's also important to create the necessary structures in order to have social innovations and also the participation of SMEs in order to for this process to become fruitful. So I try to keep my time. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward also to listen to the rest of the people. If there are any questions, I'll be happy either by mail or here to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dimitris. That was very fascinating, and yeah, looking forward to Desi's input as well. We are running behind time, so without further ado, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this very inspiring discussion. I will share a few slides to go with my presentation. And I have focused on our effort for community building in Bulgaria, because as Dimitris said already, it's very important for the just transition process to be participatory and also take into account the local communities. So just to put things into perspective, what the situation in Bulgaria is, the country still relies heavily on coal for its electricity generation, and most of the electricity production happens in a coal fleet that is practically ancient, built in the 60s and 70s of the 20th century. This, of course, leads to major episodes of air pollution in many of the locations where the coal power plants are located. There have been incidents of water shortages, so this is a problem that is familiar not only to citizens of Bulgarian Pernik, for example, unfortunately. There is also a heritage of land degradation and also economic monopoly in most of the regions where coal is produced and burned in Bulgaria. The government supports the EU climate neutrality target for 2050, but it doesn't really show any ambition for a higher to support a higher target for the 2030 benchmark, which practically means that the Bulgarian government is kind of willing to leave this major leap in the transition to a future generation. Bulgaria was also the last country to join the coal regions in transition platform organized by the European Commission, and it was as opposed to Greece, the last country to start a discussion on the energy transition, and it is still taking quite some time. I will tell you about our work in Pernik, which is a symbolic town in the mining industry. It was built around coal mining, and it is still very visibly affected by the industry. The city is home to around 80,000 people, and also to the oldest coal power plant in Europe. The city relies heavily on coal for heating, both through the district heating system and through the individual burning stoves that still use coal as well. The city suffers from major levels of air pollution, namely from sulfur dioxide, and also has been on a water regime for 6 months this year because the water supplies were illegally used for industrial purposes. Also, this city is home to a very, very active local community, which makes it so symbolic. this community has been able to mobilize many citizens in the fight against false solutions in the energy transition. The local power plant decided to introduce fuels like waste and biomass in large scale, which will have quite doubtful impacts on the climate, and also would not would even increase the water air pollution problems in the city. We help them using the already available administrative procedures of public consultations on new investment proposals of industrial plants. And that's when multiple people, 400 people from the city practically submitted statements that they are against such moves. Of course, this played a major role in the consolidation of this community, and then also resulted in positive actions such as mass tree planting in order to build those green belts between the residential areas and the major air pollution places like the minings, the mines, and the ash depots that are also in very close proximity. Then I will share with you briefly our experience in Gulemu Selo, which is a small village of just 400 residents, but it's located only 300 meters away from the power plant of Bobovdol, which is one of the most polluting power plants in Europe. A year ago, it received a permit to incinerate waste without any change in its installation and without also an impact assessment, and without any proof that the new fuel would not cause further damage to people's health or the local environment, which are already affected. Greenpeace, together with our partners from Zazemiat and also Client Earth, initiated a court case to challenge this permit for waste incineration, which was joined by more than 100 local residents as individuals, and also the Bobovdol municipality, which is without any precedent in the Bulgarian ecological movement, and has proven quite significant. Also, as part of our effort in that location, we have donated this solar lab to the local technical school in the town of Bobovdol, which used to educate future miners and workers for the power plant. But now that most of the mining has closed, there is no future for this school, and technically it struggles to attract more students. Together with the donation of the installation of the solar lab, we also supported 5 students in a training to become solar technicians. So they practically graduated from high school with a second diploma in solar technology. Of course, there is also the challenge there, because the Ministry of Education doesn't have easy pathways to introduce new courses into the curriculum. So this is where the bottom-up and top-down approaches can really meet in order to ensure that students are prepared for the future. And this is where local initiatives would really benefit from the support of governmental institutions. We also used the solar lab as the setting for a reskilling course for 5 workers from the region of Bobovdol. So the idea was that they would use the already available equipment to finish a course to become solar technicians. And as a final practical task to finish their course, they had to install the solar panels that you see on the right-hand side picture on the oldest mountain lodge, which is also on the territory of close to the Bobovdol power plant. So this is this was also the idea to provide a showcase example of how such small-scale initiatives can be hugely beneficial for communities in coal countries. And of course, it will be largely beneficial if they were replicated in other places as well and on a larger scale, but we have yet to see more governmental initiatives and ambition on that note. The huge challenges in Bulgaria are, of course, the public participation in the planning of the just transition and the transparency of the whole process, and especially the transparency around the development of the just transition territorial plans, practically setting the map for how these regions would look like in the future. There is also a need for future-proof investments. That has been the case always, but even more so now with the COVID pandemic, that we see we need more and more future-proof investments and planning so that the local communities become more resilient. Of course, that needs to happen with the top-down approach can also ensure, for example, more liberties for energy citizens and energy communities. That being said, that citizens on a small scale can participate in the energy generation system. And with this, I will end, and I will be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks you so much, Desi. And I think we've had some really vibrant presentations, looking at the experience at the regional level, both in South Africa, Eastern Cape, Mpumalanga, national level, but coming from Western Cape, and some experiences really of other countries. Really, I would like to encourage everyone to carry on the conversation. Unfortunately, we don't have time for specific Q&A now because we are behind schedule, but really, if you have any questions, please reach out to our panelists. That would be really great. Before closing, we have one final presentation, which is a video from Mr. Robert Pollock, which is a senior advisor at the Secretariat on the Initiative for Core Regions in Transition. And it really talks to us about the experience in Spain as well as in Ireland. So stay tuned for that short video. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Robert Pollock and I'm a senior advisor with the Core Regions in Transition initiative. This is a European Commission initiative that has been established to support and connect regions within the European Union that are going through a process of transition, with the intention of ensuring that that transition is a just transition. The focus, as the name would imply, is very much on core regions. However, we do also work with regions in which shale oil and peat are key parts of the region's energy mix. As part of the initiative, we have a programme of technical assistance, which we deliver to 7 European regions. The initiative is known as START, Secretariat Technical Assistance for Regions in Transition. The support covers really 4 broad areas: strategy development, project identification, project development, and support with governance and capacity development within regions. Obviously, 4 themes that are highly connected. We also use a suite of tools and measures and materials that we have developed for application across Europe's core regions. So by way of example, we have toolkits for land rehabilitation, for supporting employment and skills development within regions affected by transition. We also have toolkits on strategy and also governance. And we use these toolkits when we're working with the regions. However, the key is that the support we're providing is tailored support to the very specific needs of each region with which we're working, as all 7 regions are very different. Some produce hard coal, some produce lignite, some produce peat. Some are mono-industrial in character, others have a more diversified industrial base. Some are highly urbanized, and some of the regions we're working with are quite rural. I'd quite like to tell you about two regions we're working with at the moment, the Midlands in Ireland and also Asturias in Spain, two very different types of regions. The Midlands in Ireland is a rural economy with many dispersed communities. And we want to ensure that those communities are heard in the process of transition, and that the work that is being undertaken by public actors also reflects the needs and aspirations of the affected communities. Now, we had been hoping to have workshops, an intensive programme of workshops with the rural communities of the Midlands. However, COVID-19 ensured that wasn't possible. So we had to think of an alternative. So we actually developed an in-depth and quite sophisticated programme of online engagement with communities. And through that engagement process, we were able to explain the process of transition. We were also able to explain not only the challenges, but also the opportunities that transition might provide these communities. And we wanted to hear from the communities about their project ideas, what were their ambitions for their communities, but also what were the challenges for those communities in delivering or realising those projects and opportunities. So we engaged with the communities through an online process, and we were delighted that we got over 150 responses from a diverse set of communities. And those responses articulated not only the projects that they thought could have a meaningful impact at the community level on economic development and energy transition, they also articulated what were the challenges for delivering these projects. Once we had that list of projects collated, project ideas collated, we married that, we integrated it with a list of projects from the public sector. And so we had a comprehensive pipeline of projects, and projects that both reflected a bottom-up approach from the communities, but also a top-down approach from regional and national government, etc. And that pipeline of projects allowed us to identify synergies between projects, potential economies of scale, potential funding opportunities, but also what had to be put in place to allow these projects to go ahead. Another key output for the Midlands was the Transition Pathway Plan. Now, transition is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And like any long journey, it needs to be planned. And so through working with our partners in the Midlands, the public, the private sectors and civil society, we have mapped the key steps of transition in the short term, medium term and long term over a 10-year period. And so we now have clarity on what objectives have to be achieved and by when, and what are the measures that have to be taken forward to achieve those objectives. And we've also identified who is responsible, who is accountable for the respective measures. And so we now have a clear pathway for transition in the Midlands. Now, surely that will change. We live in a fluid and evolving and fast changing world, but we do now have one common reference point for all actors to understand the process of transition within the Midlands, and they can refresh it on a regular basis, the plan. The second region I'd like to talk to you about is Asturias in Spain. Very different from the Midlands. It is highly urbanised and it has a very developed industrial base. And many of its key industries, steel, chemicals, engineering, fabrication, require secure, reliable and cost-effective energy. Asturias, until recently, had numerous coal mines. They've all closed now, except for one. But the energy mix, the regional energy mix, is still dependent on coal, imported coal. And so we are working with Asturian authorities and Asturian partners in the private sector and also in civil society to identify a pathway plan to ensure that Asturias, over the next 10 years, can develop a regional energy system that is decarbonised, that is green, but can still deliver affordable, reliable, secure energy to maintain its industrial competitiveness. In addition, we're also working with our Asturian partners to identify the key projects that will ensure that smooth transition. Obviously, all resources are finite, and so one of the key things for our technical assistance is identifying the key projects, the key investments that will allow for this smooth process of energy transition in Asturias. Stepping back and looking at across the 7 regions with which we work, there are some common lessons for transition and for securing just transition. Firstly, government must be coordinated. Local government, regional government, national government, and in the case of Europe, the European Union, the European Commission must be coordinated. There must be coordination between the levels of government to ensure maximum impact and policy effectiveness. And that takes us on to ensuring that there is a common understanding, a common pathway of change, a pathway that articulates the key objectives, the key measures over the short, medium and long term. And it's not just a plan for the public sector, it's a plan that also requires the buy-in of private sector and civil society actors. And that takes me on to civil society. For transition to be just, communities and individuals must be involved. They must have a sense of ownership in the process, and they must have a voice in the process, because it's fundamentally important that top-down approaches are married with bottom-up approaches. That will allow successful transition. The fourth and penultimate lesson we have learned is that things that are often seen as liabilities can actually be assets. So the legacy assets of the coal industry or coal-related industries, such as land, buildings, transport infrastructure, industrial infrastructure, and also the skills of the workforce, can be repurposed, can be repositioned to be actual catalysts for economic reinvention and also for energy transition. My fifth and final point is about capacity at the local and regional level for transition. For technical assistance to be effective, the recipient of that technical assistance must have the ability to absorb the technical assistance, but also ensure that the process of technical assistance is one of co-creation, where it's not external experts coming from outside the region and giving advice. It is about a co-creative process. But for that co-creative process to be successful, localities and regions need the capacity for transition. They need the capacity to ensure successful just transition. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone who has joined us today and for all your contributions, fellow moderators and panelists, for making the time to join us today and share your insights in an effort to just do a very quick run through of today's conversation and in essence do a wrap up and closing remarks. I'd just like to quickly share my screen to just work through our very dense, very involved conversation of today. And today was about reimagining our future, entrepreneurship for just transition. And we started off with opening remarks that discuss the dual problem of challenges and opportunities and how to align and position ourselves to make sure that we're moving from extractive industries that exacerbate our climate change pressures toward opportunities that speak to partnerships and programs, many of which that were shared today during our very many conversations that move from rethinking our future to expressing and engaging further on the opportunities and looking at the pathways that help again with the partnerships and seeing how to engage the enabling policies that are both global and local and helping facilitate these meaningful partnerships and programs. We heard from IDC, Social Entrepreneurship Fund, and Stuart, along with their intention to have a national footprint in the work that they're doing. The French Development Agency, along with ESCOM, have spoken to a Just Transition Office, and the Indalopreneur Bootcamp spoke about presence and opportunity and activity that's currently happening in Mpumalanga and Limpopo. And we also had great contributions from the representative of Mpumalanga local government speaking to the activities that are in place. There were presentations around Ceratec and the GIZ and the CSIR, among other opportunities that were spoken to. And all of this was in an effort to, again, speak to the importance of our just transition to just and green opportunities that speak to a movement in the spaces of jobs, skills, and territories, moving from old to new in innovative, collaborative ways that speak to identifying and people, putting the human beings and the people at center of the solutions that we're looking to drive. I would like to encourage everyone who has joined us today to, in essence, engage directly either with Indalo Inclusive or the various partners and panelists who have shared their details during the presentations today in the chat interface, and send a very, very, very heartfelt note of appreciation and gratitude to the organizers behind the scenes, making sure that today's webinars runs as smoothly as possible, and to the various different departments and partnerships that made today happen. The Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries of our beloved South Africa, the Republic of South Africa, the European Union, and along with the Federal Republic of Germany's Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature, Conservation, and Nuclear Safety. And again, to all the other partners that have joined us and shared their presentations, their insights, and their lessons from the work that they're doing to reimagining our future and facilitating entrepreneurship for a just transition. To everyone that joined again, thank you very much for making the time. Thank you for sharing your comments. And we look forward to working together and facilitating more impactful work as part of our conversation in this here Climate Week. Thank you very much. Have a great day and stay blessed. Siyabulela.